Salamat Pagi. Everyone. Welcome back to our podcast. Brought to you by the amazing team at Jetoff AI. Today, we're super to dive into a fascinating comparison of two incredible countries, Malaysia and Qatar. Whoa.
Ah, yes. And I'm thrilled to be here with my co-host, the lovely Mira. We've had an amazing response to our previous podcasts, and we're grateful for your continued support. Thanks for tuning in, folks.
Before we dive into our main topic, let's share a funny story from our previous podcast. Leo, you were the one who spilled coffee all over his shirt during our live recording. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do remember, and I'm still traumatized by the experience. But, it's all part of the show, right?
Right. And speaking of shows, we had a fantastic time at the Malaysia Festival last week, where we tried all sorts of delicious street food. Ooh! I even attempted to dance the traditional Malaysian dance, the joget. Whoa!
Oh, Mira, you're such a goofball. I'm sure the festival goers loved your unique dancing style.
Well, I like to think of myself as a cultural ambassador, spreading joy and laughter wherever I go. But, seriously, folks, today we're going to talk about two countries that are often misunderstood or overlooked. We'll be comparing Malaysia and Qatar, and we'll answer all your questions about which country is right for you.
That's right. With today's podcast, we'll be providing a comprehensive guide to help you make informed decisions about living, moving, or even marrying someone from one of these countries. Well, it's a tough job, but someone's got to do it.
And, of course, we'll be sharing our own personal experiences and insights, so you can get a real feel for what it's like to live in each country. We'll cover everything from culture and customs to food, nightlife, and even the best places to visit.
That's right. And, as always, we'll be bringing our unique perspectives and humor to the conversation. So, sit back, relax, and get ready to learn all about Malaysia and Qatar. Well,
and don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more exciting content. We're always looking for new ideas and topics, so feel free to suggest them in the comments below.
And if you have any questions or comments about today's topic, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you. Now, let's get started on our comparison of Malaysia and Qatar. Well,
so which country do you think is more challenging to navigate, Malaysia or Qatar? As a seasoned traveler, I think Malaysia is a bit more forgiving, but Qatar has its own unique charms.
That's an interesting point. Mira. But I think Qatar is actually quite easy to navigate, especially with its modern infrastructure and excellent public transportation system. Well,
that's true, Leo. But have you ever tried to drive in Malaysia? It's a whole different story.
Yes, I have tried driving in Malaysia, and it was an experience. But, seriously, folks, both countries have their own unique challenges and advantages. We'll be discussing all of them in depth today.
That's right. And, as always, we'll be providing you with plenty of insights along the way. So, let's get started and see which country comes out on top.
Sounds like a plan. Mira! Let's do this. Wow.
I'm curious, Leo, what comes to mind when you think of Malaysia in terms of general safety and crime rates?
Oh, Malaysia. I've had some wild experiences there. But overall, I'd say it's a pretty safe country. Of course, as with anywhere, you've got to be aware of your surroundings. especially in crowded areas like Peddling Street in Kuala Lumpur.
Petling Street. Yes, I love that place. But I can see what you mean. I've heard stories about pickpocketing and scams, especially in tourist areas. But it's not like it's a major concern, right?
Exactly. And Malaysia's got a great police force. The Royal Malaysian Police. They're always on the lookout for potential threats. And they've got a good track record of keeping crime under control.
That's reassuring to hear. But what about crime statistics? I've heard that Malaysia has a relatively high crime rate compared to some other countries in Southeast Asia.
Ah, yes. The numbers do show that. But let's not forget, Leo, that crime rates can fluctuate. And there are many factors to consider. I'm sure our listeners living in Malaysia would agree with me that it's not all doom and gloom.
Indeed. I'm sure they would. And I'm curious, have you ever had any close calls or experiences with crime in Malaysia?
Well, I did have a funny incident where I got scammed by a fake taxi driver in Penang. But thankfully, I was able to get out of it without any major issues.
Oh no. That's hilarious. I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about that story. But let's get back to Qatar. I've heard that it's a very safe country, especially for tourists.
Yes, Qatar is indeed a very safe country, with low crime rates compared to other countries in the region. And it's not just the police force that's responsible for keeping crime under control. The government also plays a big role in promoting a culture of safety and security.
That's fascinating. I've heard that Qatar has a very strong focus on community policing, which helps to build trust between the police and the public.
Exactly. And it shows in the way that Qatari society values community and family ties. It's a very tight-knit society, where everyone looks out for each other.
I can see that. And I'm sure our listeners would agree that it's wonderful to see a country prioritizing community and safety. But what about Malaysia? I've heard that it's not all sunshine and rainbows when it comes to crime and safety.
Ah, yes. Unfortunately, Malaysia does have some issues with crime and safety, especially in areas like Sabah and Sarawak. But overall, I think the country is doing a great job of tackling these issues and promoting a culture of safety and security.
That's reassuring to hear. And I'm sure our listeners would appreciate any advice or tips on how to stay safe while traveling in Malaysia.
Well, I'd say that one of the most important things is to be aware of your surroundings and trust your instincts. If something feels off, don't hesitate to seek help or advice from the local authorities.
Excellent advice, Leo. And finally, I'm curious, have you ever had any experiences with crime or safety issues in Qatar?
Actually, I've had a very positive experience with the Qatari police. They're very friendly and helpful, and they're always willing to go the extra mile to ensure that visitors are safe and happy.
That's wonderful to hear. And I'm sure our listeners would appreciate any insights or advice on how to stay safe while traveling in Qatar.
Well, I think the most important thing is to be respectful of local customs and traditions, and to trust the authorities to keep you safe.
Excellent advice, Leo. And finally, I'd like to ask our listeners, have you ever had any experiences with crime or safety issues in Malaysia or Qatar? Please share your stories and tips in the comments below. I'm certain our listeners living in Malaysia would agree with me that the country's unique blend of Malay, Chinese, and Indian cultures creates a fascinating social tapestry. From street food to festivals, there's always something to celebrate.
That's right. Mia. And what about Qatar? I've heard their Emir, Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, is working hard to promote social harmony and stability in the country. But let's dive deeper into Malaysia's political system first. How does it contribute to social harmony?
Well, Leo, Malaysia's system is a parliamentary democracy with a constitutional monarchy. This ensures that the government is accountable to the people, and there are checks and balances in place to prevent any one group from dominating the others.
I see what you mean, Mira. And what about the role of Islam in Malaysian politics? I've heard it plays a significant role, especially in the country's laws and institutions.
That's correct. Islam is the official religion of Malaysia, and it's enshrined in the country's constitution. The government has also made efforts to promote interfaith dialogue and understanding, which has helped to reduce tensions between different communities.
That's interesting. I've heard that Malaysia has a strong tradition of multiculturalism, with people from different ethnic and religious backgrounds living together in harmony. But what about the challenges that Malaysia faces in terms of social harmony?
Ah, yes. Leo, one of the biggest challenges Malaysia faces is the issue of racial and religious tensions. For example, in 2008, there were protests and riots in the country following the government's decision to allow non-Muslims to use the word Allah in their worship.
Wow, that's a sensitive issue. But what about Qatar? I've heard they have a very different system of government, with an absolute monarchy.
That's right. Leo, Qatar is an absolute monarchy, with the emir holding significant powers. However, the government has also made efforts to promote social harmony and stability, especially in the wake of the Arab Spring.
I see what you mean. Mia. And what about the role of women in Qatari society? I've heard they have made significant strides in recent years, especially in terms of education and employment.
That's correct. Leo, women in Qatar have made significant progress in recent years, with many holding important positions in government, business, and society. There are still challenges to be addressed, especially in terms of women's rights and freedoms.
I'm curious. Mira, what do you think our listeners think about the role of women in Qatari society? Do they think it's a positive development, or are there still concerns about women's rights?
Ah, that's a great question. Leo, I think our listeners would agree that it's a positive development, but there's still more work to be done. Perhaps we can ask them to share their thoughts in the comments section.
Absolutely. Mira, and what about the impact of globalization on social harmony in both Malaysia and Qatar? I've heard that globalization can bring both benefits and challenges, especially in terms of cultural exchange and economic development.
That's right. Leo, globalization has brought many benefits to both countries, especially in terms of economic development and cultural exchange. However, it's also brought challenges, especially in terms of cultural homogenization and the erosion of traditional values.
I see what you mean. Mia, and what about the role of education in promoting social harmony in both countries? I've heard that education is key to promoting tolerance and understanding between different communities.
That's correct. Education is a crucial factor in promoting social harmony in both countries, especially in terms of teaching tolerance and understanding between different communities.
I'm curious. Mia, what do you think our listeners think about the role of education in promoting social harmony? Do they think it's a key factor, or are there other factors at play?
Ah, that's a great question. Leo, I think our listeners would agree that education is a key factor. But there are also other factors at play, especially in terms of community engagement and social cohesion.
Absolutely. Mira, and finally, what do you think are the key takeaways from our discussion on political stability and social harmony in Malaysia and Qatar? What can our listeners learn from these two countries?
Ah, that's a great question. Leo, I think our listeners can learn that both countries have made significant progress in promoting social harmony and stability, especially in terms of education and community engagement. However, there are still challenges to be addressed, especially in terms of racial and religious tensions.
That's right. Mira. And what about the role of Jeddah? I am providing insights like this. I think they do a great job of providing valuable information and analysis on a range of topics.
Absolutely. Leo, and for more insights like this, don't forget to check out Jeddah. They have a wealth of information on topics like politics, culture, and social issues.
Well, that's all for today's topic. Folks, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you in the next episode.
And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast for more informative and engaging discussions on a range of topics. So let's dive into the economic conditions and cost of living in Malaysia. I'm sure many of you are curious about the financial realities of living in this beautiful country. From what I've gathered, Malaysia has a solid job market, with a strong service sector and a growing economy. But, as with any country, there are pros and cons. What are your thoughts? Leo?
Well, Mira, I think Malaysia's economy is indeed growing, but it's also becoming increasingly reliant on foreign investment. This can create a sense of uncertainty for expats, who may be concerned about their job security. Plus, the cost of living in Kuala Lumpur, the capital city, is quite high, especially when it comes to housing and transportation. I'm curious, have you lived in Malaysia long enough to notice these trends firsthand?
Actually, I have. And I must say, the cost of living is indeed a challenge. But, on the other hand, the people are so warm and welcoming. I remember trying to haggle at a local market and getting laughed at by the vendors. They were so kind and patient with me, even when I was being a complete tourist. It was a great experience.
Ah, yes. Haggling at markets is an art form in Malaysia. But, seriously, the cost of living can be a challenge, especially for expats who are used to a Western standard of living. I've heard that the cost of a decent apartment in Kuala Lumpur can range from $1 to $3 per month, depending on the location and amenities. That's a pretty steep price tag.
Yes, it is. But, as I said, the people are wonderful. And if you're willing to live outside of the city center, you can find more affordable options. I've heard that the cost of living in smaller towns like Penang or Malacca is significantly lower. Plus, the culture is so rich and vibrant, with a mix of Malay, Chinese, and Indian influences.
That's true. And, of course, Malaysia has a lot to offer in terms of cuisine. From nasi lemak to char kway tua, the food is amazing. But, I'm curious, what about the job market? How easy is it for expats to find work in Malaysia?
Well, it's not as easy as it used to be. To be honest, with the rise of automation and AI, many jobs are becoming redundant. But there are still opportunities in sectors like finance, technology, and healthcare. And, of course, if you're a skilled worker, you may be eligible for a work visa. I'm sure our listeners living in Malaysia would agree with me that it's not always easy to find work. But it's definitely possible with the right skills and experience.
That's right. And, speaking of work visas, I've heard that Qatar is also a popular destination for expats. Can you tell us a bit about the economic conditions and cost of living in Qatar? Mira?
Actually, I can. Qatar has a booming economy, driven by oil and gas exports. But the cost of living is extremely high, especially in Doha, the capital city. A decent apartment can cost upwards of $5 per month, and that's not including the rent for a separate office space, which can be a requirement for many expats. Plus, the heat in Qatar is just unbearable during the summer months.
Ah, yes. The heat in Qatar can be intense. But, seriously, the cost of living is a significant challenge for expats. And, as you mentioned, the rent is exorbitant. I've heard that some expats are even paying up to $10 per month for a luxury apartment in Doha. That's just outrageous.
I know, right? It's like, what's the point of being rich if you can't even afford a decent place to live? But, in all seriousness, the cost of living in Qatar is a major concern for many expats. And, if you're not careful, you can end up living in a tiny apartment with a roommate, just to make ends meet.
That's true. But, on the other hand, Qatar has a lot to offer in terms of culture and entertainment. From the Souk Waqif to the Museum of Islamic Art, there's no shortage of things to see and do. And, of course, the food is amazing, with a mix of Middle Eastern and international cuisine.
That's right. And, as I said, the people are so welcoming and friendly. I've heard that Qatar has a very high standard of living, with excellent healthcare and education systems. But, of course, that comes at a price.
Ah, yes. The price of living in Qatar is steep, to say the least. But, as you said, the people are wonderful. And the culture is rich and vibrant. And, who knows, maybe one day we'll be able to afford a decent apartment in Doha.
Yeah, maybe. But, in all seriousness, the economic conditions and cost of living in both Malaysia and Qatar are complex issues that require careful consideration. I'm sure our listeners would agree with me that it's essential to do your research and plan carefully before making the move to either of these countries.
That's right. And, if you have any tips or advice for our listeners, please share them in the comments below. We'd love to hear your experiences and insights.
Absolutely. And don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more content on expectancy and culture.
And, as always, remember to bring your sense of humor and your wallet.
Yeah, because you never know what fate's about living. So, let's talk about accommodation options and quality in Malaysia and Qatar. I'm sure our listeners living in these countries would agree with me that finding a great place to stay can make all the difference.
Absolutely. Mira, I mean, who wants to live in a dingy, cramped apartment when you can have a spacious, modern place to call home? Am I right?
Right. Leo. And it's not just about the space, but also the amenities and services that come with it. In Malaysia, for instance, you can find affordable options like guest houses and hostels. But if you're looking for something more luxurious, there are plenty of high-end apartments and hotels to choose from.
That's true. And I've heard that Malaysia has a great mix of old and new architecture, with some amazing colonial-era buildings and modern skyscrapers. I'm sure it's a fascinating place to explore.
Exactly. And speaking of exploring, have you heard about the famous Batu Caves in Kuala Lumpur? They're a must-visit attraction, and there are plenty of accommodation options nearby, from budget-friendly guest houses to luxury hotels.
Wow, that sounds amazing. And I've heard that Qatar is also known for its amazing architecture, with some stunning modern buildings and beautiful mosques. But I'm curious, Mira, what's the accommodation scene like in Qatar?
Qatar is a great question. So, if you're looking for a luxurious experience, Qatar has plenty of high-end hotels and resorts to choose from. But, if you're on a budget, there are also some affordable options like apartments and guest houses.
That's great to know. And I've heard that Qatar has some amazing shopping centers and malls, like the famous Mall of Qatar. I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the accommodation options in these areas.
Absolutely. And if you're planning to stay in Qatar for an extended period, you might want to consider renting an apartment or house, which can be a more cost-effective option than booking a hotel room every night.
That's a great point. Mira, and I've heard that Qatar has some amazing expat communities, with plenty of amenities and services catering to foreigners. I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about these communities.
Well, Leo, I think we've covered a lot of ground already, but I'm sure our listeners have plenty of questions about accommodation options in Malaysia and Qatar. So, let's open it up to them. If you have any questions or comments, please let us know in the comments section below.
That's a great idea. Mira, and I'm sure our listeners will appreciate your insights and advice on finding the perfect accommodation in these two amazing countries.
Thanks, Leo. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more content on travel, culture, and lifestyle.
And if you have any more questions or topics you'd like to discuss, feel free to let us know in the comments below.
And that's all for now. Folks, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next episode.
And don't forget to like and share this video with your friends and family who might be interested in traveling to Malaysia and Qatar.
So, let's talk about Malaysia and Qatar. Two countries with different approaches to visa, immigration, and official procedures. I'm curious to know, Leo, what's the most common misconception about getting a visa for Malaysia?
I think it's that Malaysia is super strict about issuing visas. But, from what I've researched, it's actually quite straightforward, especially for tourists. They have an e-visa system that makes it easy to apply online.
That's great to know. And what about Qatar? I heard it's quite a bureaucratic process, but I'm not sure if that's true.
Yeah, Qatar can be a bit tricky, but it's definitely doable. They have a sponsorship system, which means you need to have a Qatari sponsor to apply for a work visa. But if you're a tourist, you can get a visa on arrival.
I see. So it sounds like Malaysia is more tourist-friendly in terms of visa requirements. But what about the actual application process? Is it easy to navigate?
Well, Malaysia's e-visa system is pretty user-friendly, but Qatar's sponsorship system can be a bit more complicated. You need to find a sponsor who's willing to vouch for you, and then you need to go through a series of checks and balances.
I can imagine that would be frustrating. But what about our listeners who might be planning to move to Qatar? Do you think it's worth the hassle?
Absolutely. Qatar is a great country to live in, with a great quality of life and a strong economy. And while the visa process might be a bit more complicated, it's definitely worth it.
That's great advice. Leo, and what about Malaysia? Is it a good option for expats?
Definitely. Malaysia is a very welcoming country, with a diverse culture and a great food scene. And the cost of living is relatively low compared to other countries in the region.
I'm certain that our listeners living in Malaysia would agree with me. The cost of living is indeed very affordable, and the people are incredibly friendly.
Yes, Malaysia is a great choice for expats. And I think what sets it apart from Qatar is the ease of getting a visa. Malaysia has a more streamlined process, which makes it easier for tourists and expats to navigate.
That's a great point. Leo, and what about our listeners who might be planning to move to Malaysia? Do you have any tips for them?
Well, I think the most important thing is to research. Research. Understand the visa requirements and the sponsorship system, and make sure you have all the necessary documents.
That's great advice. Leo, and what about the official procedures in both countries? Are there any common issues that expats might encounter?
Yeah, I think one common issue is the language barrier. In Qatar, Arabic is the official language, and in Malaysia, Malay is the official language. So it's a good idea to learn a few basic phrases in each language to help you navigate the official procedures.
That's a great tip. Leo, and what about our listeners who might be planning to move to either country? Do you think it's worth it?
Absolutely. Both Malaysia and Qatar are great countries to live in, with a high quality of life and a strong economy. And while the visa process might be a bit more complicated in Qatar, it's definitely worth it.
I think we've covered a lot of ground today. But before we wrap up, I just want to ask our listeners, have you had any experiences with the visa process in either Malaysia or Qatar? Share your stories with us in the comments below.
And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more content on expat life and travel. Thanks for tuning in, everyone!
Dive into the world of healthcare in Malaysia and Qatar. I'm curious to know, Leo, have you ever been to Malaysia and had to deal with their healthcare system firsthand?
Yes, I have. And let me tell you, it was a wild ride. But seriously, Malaysia has a well-regarded public healthcare system, especially in urban areas like Kuala Lumpur. The government-run hospitals are equipped with modern facilities and staffed by well-trained doctors.
That's great to hear. I've heard that Malaysia has a universal healthcare system, which means that almost everyone has access to healthcare, regardless of their income level. But what about Qatar? Leah, how does their healthcare system compare?
Well, Qatar has a more expensive healthcare system, but it's also one of the most advanced in the world. They have top-notch hospitals and medical facilities, and many of the doctors are trained in the UK or the US. But, of course, with great healthcare comes a great price tag.
I see what you mean. It's interesting that both countries have their strengths and weaknesses when it comes to healthcare. But what about the cultural aspect of healthcare in these countries? How do locals approach healthcare? And what can expats expect?
That's a great question. In Malaysia, healthcare is often seen as a family affair. Patients will often bring their families with them to the hospital, and it's not uncommon to see children playing in the waiting room while their parents receive treatment. In Qatar, on the other hand, healthcare is often more formal and professional.
That's really interesting. I can imagine that having a family member with you in the hospital can be a big comfort, especially if you're not familiar with the healthcare system. But what about language barriers? How do expats navigate the healthcare system in Malaysia and Qatar if they don't speak the local language?
That's a great point. In Malaysia, many doctors and nurses speak English, especially in urban areas, so it's relatively easy for expats to communicate. In Qatar, however, Arabic is the primary language, and not everyone speaks English. But many hospitals have translators and interpreters available, so it's not too difficult for expats to navigate the system.
That's reassuring to know. And what about health insurance? Do expats need to have health insurance to receive treatment in these countries?
Yes. Health insurance is highly recommended in both countries. In Malaysia, many employers offer health insurance as part of their benefits package, but expats can also purchase private insurance. In Qatar, health insurance is mandatory for all expats, and the cost varies depending on the type of insurance and the employer.
Okay, got it. So it sounds like both countries have their pros and cons when it comes to healthcare. But what about patient satisfaction? How do locals and expats rate the healthcare system in Malaysia and Qatar?
That's a great question. According to various surveys, patient satisfaction is generally higher in Malaysia than in Qatar. Malaysians tend to be more satisfied with the quality of care and the availability of services, while Qataris tend to be more concerned about the cost and accessibility of healthcare.
Okay, that's helpful to know. And finally, what advice would you give to our listeners who are planning to move to Malaysia or Qatar, or for work or retirement?
That's a great question. I would say that both countries have their unique healthcare challenges and opportunities. In Malaysia, expats should be prepared for a more laid-back and family-oriented healthcare system. While in Qatar, they should be prepared for a more formal and professional system with a higher price tag.
Well, that's all the time we have for today's topic. I hope our listeners found this information helpful. And we'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments section below. And remember, if you're planning to move to Malaysia or Qatar, don't forget to research and prepare for the healthcare system ahead of time. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
And don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more content on expat life and healthcare in Malaysia and Qatar.
So, let's dive into transportation, infrastructure and convenience in Malaysia and Qatar. I've been on some crazy buses in Malaysia, Leo, but I have to say, their public transit system is quite impressive. The Klang Valley Integrated Transit System is a game changer, connecting the entire city with efficient and affordable routes.
Yes. Malaysia's got some amazing public transit systems. But have you seen the traffic in Kuala Lumpur? It's like a never-ending game of Frogger. I swear, I've seen cars driving on the sidewalk just to avoid the jams. And don't even get me started on the taxis. They're like a choose-your-own-adventure story, where you never know where you'll end up.
Oh, that's so true. But, Leo, you have to admit, the taxis in Malaysia are quite an adventure. And, in all seriousness, the country's invested heavily in its public transit system. Did you know that the Klang Valley's mass rapid transit system is one of the most efficient in Southeast Asia?
I didn't know that, but it makes sense. Malaysia's got a lot of experience with managing crowds and chaos. What with the Hari Raya, Aidilfitri celebrations and all. But, speaking of chaos, have you ever tried to navigate the roads in Qatar during rush hour? It's like trying to thread a needle while blindfolded.
Oh, Leo, that's such a great analogy. But, in all seriousness, Qatar's got some amazing roads and infrastructure. The country's invested heavily in its transportation system, with a focus on making it as efficient and convenient as possible. And, I have to say, their public transit system is quite impressive, especially the Doha Metro.
Yes. The Doha Metro is a marvel of modern engineering. But have you seen the prices of taxis in Qatar? It's like they're charging us per mile. But, in all seriousness, I've heard that the public transit system in Qatar is quite comprehensive, with buses and metro lines connecting the entire city.
Oh, Leo, you're such a comedian. But Qatar's got some amazing public transit options. And I have to say, the country's commitment to sustainability is really impressive. Did you know that Qatar's investing heavily in electric and hybrid vehicles to reduce its carbon footprint?
That's really cool. And, I have to say, I've been impressed by the efficiency of the public transit system in Qatar. It's like they've got a secret formula for making transportation magic happen. But, I have to ask, Mira, have you ever tried to navigate the roads in Malaysia during rush hour? It's like trying to solve a puzzle blindfolded.
Oh, Leo, that's such a great analogy. But seriously, navigating the roads in Malaysia during rush hour can be a challenge, to say the least. But I have to say, the country's got some amazing road infrastructure, especially the highways connecting Kuala Lumpur to the surrounding cities.
Yes. The highways in Malaysia are quite impressive. But, have you seen the traffic in Qatar during the World Cup? It's like the whole country's gone crazy. But, in all seriousness, I've heard that Qatar is investing heavily in its transportation system to handle the influx of visitors during the World Cup.
Oh, Leo, you're such a comedian. But seriously, Qatar's got some amazing infrastructure to handle the crowds during the World Cup. And I have to say, the country's commitment to sustainability is really impressive. Did you know that Qatar's investing heavily in renewable energy to power its transportation system?
That's really cool. And I have to say, I've been impressed by the efficiency of the public transit system in Qatar. It's like they've got a secret formula for making transportation magic happen. But I have to ask, Mira, what do you think is the biggest challenge facing Malaysia's transportation infrastructure?
That's a great question. Leo, I think one of the biggest challenges facing Malaysia's transportation infrastructure is the country's rapid urbanization. With so many people moving to the cities, the demand for transportation is increasing exponentially, and the country's struggling to keep up.
Yes. That makes sense. And I have to say, I've heard that Qatar is struggling with similar challenges, especially with the influx of visitors during the World Cup. But I have to ask, Mira, what do you think is the most important thing for travelers to know when it comes to transportation in Malaysia and Qatar?
That's a great question, Leo. I think the most important thing for travelers to know is that both countries have invested heavily in their transportation infrastructure, and it's getting easier and easier to get around. Whether you're taking the metro, bus, or taxi, there are plenty of options available to make your journey as smooth and convenient as possible.
Yes. That's really reassuring to hear, Mira. And I have to say, I've been impressed by the commitment of both countries to making transportation as convenient and efficient as possible. It's like they're trying to outdo each other in a game of transportation Olympics.
Oh, Leo, you're such a comedian. But seriously, both countries are doing a great job of investing in their transportation infrastructure, and it's making a big difference for travelers. I bet our listeners in both countries are eager to share their own transportation tips and hacks. What do you all think about this? Tell us below.
Oh, Mira, they're such a tease. But seriously, I think it's great that both countries are investing in a transportation infrastructure. And I have to ask, Mira, what's the most memorable transportation experience you've had in either country?
That's a great question. Leo, I think one of the most memorable transportation experiences I've had in Malaysia was taking a train from Kuala Lumpur to the Cameron Highlands. The scenery was breathtaking, and the train was so comfortable it was like being on a luxury cruise.
Yes. The Cameron Highlands are definitely a highlight of any trip to Malaysia. And I have to say, I've heard that Qatar's got some amazing scenic routes as well. especially the Doha garnish. But I have to ask, Mira, what do you think is the biggest difference between the transportation systems in Malaysia and Qatar?
That's a great question. Leo, I think one of the biggest differences between the transportation systems in Malaysia and Qatar is the level of investment in public transit. Qatar's got a much more comprehensive public transit system, with buses and metro lines connecting the entire city.
Ah, yes, that makes sense. And I have to say, I've heard that Malaysia's public transit system is still catching up, but it's getting better and better. But
So, when it comes to language barriers, I think Malaysia and Qatar have some differences. In Malaysia, with over 130 languages spoken, you'd think it would be a challenge for foreigners to communicate. But, surprisingly, many Malaysians speak English as a second language, making it easier for tourists and expats to get around.
that's true, but it's still a diverse country with many ethnic groups, each with their own language. I've heard that some of the indigenous tribes, like the Orang Asli, have their own unique languages that are not widely spoken. So, while English is widely used, there are still areas where language can be a barrier.
I see what you mean, but I think Qatar is a great example of a country that's made significant efforts to improve communication for tourists. With Arabic being the official language, it's true that many expats and visitors may struggle to communicate. But with the widespread use of English, and even some locals speaking other languages like Urdu or Hindi, it's still relatively easy to get by.
That's a good point. But have you ever tried to order food in a Qatari restaurant? I mean, it's not just about understanding the language, but also the cultural nuances. I've had some interesting experiences where I thought I knew what I was ordering, but it turned out to be something completely different.
Oh, Leo, you're such a comedian. But seriously, I think that's a great example of how language barriers can be overcome with a little bit of tea. And I'm sure our listeners living in Qatar would agree that trying new foods is all part of the adventure.
Yeah, I guess I was just trying to add a bit of spice to the conversation. But in all seriousness, I think it's great that Qatar is making efforts to promote English language skills among its citizens. It's definitely made a big difference for expats like me who are trying to navigate the city.
That's right. And I think it's also worth noting that both Malaysia and Qatar have made significant investments in technology to facilitate communication. From online language learning platforms to translation apps, there are many resources available to help bridge the language gap.
Absolutely. And I think that's a great example of how technology can be used to overcome language barriers. But I'm also curious to know what our listeners think about this. Do you have any tips for navigating language barriers in Malaysia or Qatar? Share your experiences in the comments below.
Great point, Leo. And speaking of technology, I think it's also worth mentioning that both countries have made significant efforts to promote digital literacy, with many Malaysians in Qatar now using social media and online platforms. It's become easier to connect with locals and get a feel for the culture.
That's true. And I think it's also worth noting that both countries have a strong tradition of hospitality. In Malaysia, the concept of go to Eng Royong or community service is still strong. And in Qatar, the idea of daya or generosity is deeply ingrained. These cultural values really help to break down language barriers and create a sense of connection with others.
I completely agree, Leo. And I think that's a great example of how language barriers can be overcome with a little bit of cultural understanding and empathy. If you're a listener who struggled with language barriers in Malaysia or Qatar, please share your story with us in the comments below.
And finally, I think it's worth noting that both countries have a strong sense of community. In Malaysia, the concept of kampong or village is still strong. And in Qatar, the idea of baladi or neighborhood is deeply ingrained. These community ties really help to create a sense of belonging and connection with others.
Well, that's all for now, folks. Thanks for tuning into our conversation about language barriers and ease of communication in Malaysia and Qatar. We hope you found it informative and entertaining. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and follow us on social media for more content like this. I'm so to dive into cultural diversity and tolerance in Malaysia and Qatar. Both countries are known for their vibrant multiculturalism. But I'm curious, Leo, how do you think they compare in this regard?
Well, Mira, I think Malaysia is a great example of how a country can celebrate its multicultural heritage. With a mix of Malay, Chinese, Indian, and indigenous cultures. It's a melting pot of diversity, and I'm sure our listeners living in Malaysia would agree that the country's motto, Malaysia Bo, or Malaysia Can, reflects its ability to bring people together.
That's so true. Leo! And speaking of bringing people together, I've heard that Malaysia has a unique approach to promoting social cohesion through its One Malaysia initiative. Can you tell us more about that?
Ah, yes. The One Malaysia initiative is all about promoting unity and understanding among the country's diverse communities. It's a great example of how a country can use social programs to foster tolerance and acceptance. I'm curious, Mira, have you ever had the chance to experience Malaysia's cultural diversity firsthand?
Actually, Leo, I have. And it was amazing to see how people from different backgrounds came together to celebrate their unique cultures. I even tried some delicious Malaysian street food, which was a highlight of my trip.
Ah, I'm sure it was. Malaysian food is amazing. And speaking of food, I've heard that Qatar has its own unique culinary scene, with a mix of traditional Arabic, Iranian, and Indian cuisine. Have you ever tried Qatari cuisine? Mira?
Actually, I haven't, but I'm curious to try it now. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about Qatar's cultural diversity. Can you tell us more about the country's approach to promoting social cohesion?
Well, Mira, Qatar has made significant strides in promoting social cohesion through its Qatar National Vision 2030 initiative. The program aims to create a more inclusive and tolerant society, with a focus on education, healthcare, and social welfare. And I'm sure our listeners would agree that promoting social cohesion is essential for building a harmonious and diverse society.
Absolutely. And speaking of education, I've heard that both Malaysia and Qatar place a strong emphasis on promoting cultural understanding and tolerance through education. Can you tell us more about that?
Yes. Both countries recognize the importance of education in promoting cultural diversity and tolerance. In Malaysia, for example, the government has implemented programs to promote bilingualism and multiculturalism in schools. And in Qatar, the government has established a number of cultural centers and museums to promote cultural understanding and appreciation.
That's so great to hear. Leo! And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the personal stories of people who have experienced cultural diversity and tolerance firsthand. Can you share a personal story with us?
Yes. I have a friend who is a Malaysian Indian who grew up in a multicultural family. He told me that his parents always emphasized the importance of respecting and celebrating different cultures, and that has stayed with him to this day. He's now a successful businessman who has worked with people from all over the world, and he attributes his success to the values of tolerance and understanding that he learned from his parents.
Well, that's such a powerful story. Leo, and I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about the role of social media in promoting cultural diversity and tolerance. Can you tell us more about that?
Yes. Social media has played a significant role in promoting cultural diversity and tolerance in both Malaysia and Qatar. In Malaysia, for example, social media has been used to promote unity and understanding among different communities, particularly during times of social unrest. And in Qatar, social media has been used to promote cultural exchange and understanding between Qataris and foreigners.
That's so great to hear. Leo! And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the challenges that both countries face in promoting cultural diversity and tolerance. Can you tell us more about that?
Yes. Both countries face challenges in promoting cultural diversity and tolerance, particularly with regards to issues of identity and belonging. In Malaysia, for example, there have been concerns about the erosion of Malay identity and the growing influence of foreign cultures. And in Qatar, There have been concerns about the impact of rapid modernization and urbanization on traditional Qatari culture.
I see what you mean, Leo. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the ways in which both countries are working to address these challenges. Can you tell us more about that?
Yes. Both countries are taking steps to address these challenges, particularly through education and social programs. In Malaysia, for example, the government has established a number of programs to promote Malay language and culture, and to promote understanding and appreciation of different cultures. And in Qatar, the government has established a number of cultural centers and museums to promote cultural understanding and appreciation.
That's so great to hear. Leo, and finally, I'm curious, what do you think is the key to promoting cultural diversity and tolerance in both Malaysia and Qatar?
I think the key is education. Mira, education has the power to promote understanding and acceptance of different cultures, and to foster a sense of social cohesion and unity. And I'm sure our listeners would agree that education is essential for building a harmonious and diverse society.
Absolutely. Leo! And I think that's a great note to end on. Thank you for sharing your insights and perspectives with us. And I'm sure our listeners will appreciate the information and perspectives you've shared.
Thank you. Mira, it's been a pleasure discussing cultural diversity and tolerance in Malaysia and Qatar with you.
I'm fascinated by Malaysia's emphasis on science, technology, engineering, and mathematics education. Their efforts to create a skilled workforce have paid off, with many students going on to pursue careers in these fields.
That's impressive. But Qatar's education system is also highly regarded, particularly when it comes to language acquisition. Their schools are known for offering a range of languages, including English, Arabic, and French.
Yes. Language is a crucial aspect of education, and Malaysia has made significant strides in this area as well. Their language programs are designed to promote cultural understanding and communication skills.
Exactly. And Qatar's emphasis on language learning is also driven by its cultural heritage. Arabic is the official language, but English is widely spoken, making it an ideal destination for language learners.
I'm curious, have you ever had any experience with language learning in Malaysia or Qatar? Perhaps a funny story about trying to navigate a language barrier?
Well, I did have a memorable experience trying to order food in Malaysia. I asked for nasi lemak and ended up with a plate of spicy noodles instead of the usual coconut milk rice.
No. That sounds like a typical language learning experience. But seriously, both countries offer a range of language programs for expats and locals alike.
That's right. And Qatar's universities are particularly well regarded for their language and cultural programs. I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Have any of you had experience with language learning in Malaysia or Qatar?
Absolutely. And I think it's worth noting that both countries have a strong focus on education as a whole. Malaysia's education system is designed to promote critical and problem-solving skills, while Qatar's emphasis on language learning is driven by its cultural heritage.
Exactly. And I think it's interesting to see how these two countries approach language learning in different ways. Malaysia's approach is more focused on promoting cultural understanding, while Qatar's approach is more focused on language acquisition.
Well, I think it's clear that both countries have a lot to offer when it comes to education and language learning. And speaking of language learning, have you ever tried to navigate a language barrier in a foreign country?
Oh, yes. I have had my fair share of language learning experiences, including trying to order food in Arabic.
Well, I'm sure our listeners can relate to that experience. But, in all seriousness, language learning is a crucial aspect of education. And both Malaysia and Qatar offer a range of language programs for expats and locals alike.
That's right. And I think it's worth noting that both countries have a strong focus on education as a whole. Malaysia's education system is designed to promote critical and problem-solving skills, while Qatar's emphasis on language learning is driven by its cultural heritage.
I'm curious, have you ever had any experience with educational institutions in Malaysia or Qatar? Perhaps a funny story about a particularly memorable teacher or learning experience?
Well, I did have a memorable experience with a teacher in Malaysia who was known for his unconventional teaching methods. Let's just say it was an adventure.
Oh no, that sounds like a typical experience with a memorable teacher. But seriously, both countries have a range of educational institutions that offer high-quality education and language learning programs.
That's right. And I think it's worth noting that both countries have a strong focus on education as a whole. Malaysia's education system is designed to promote critical and problem-solving skills, while Qatar's emphasis on language learning is driven by its cultural heritage.
Well, I think it's clear that both countries have a lot to offer when it comes to education and language learning. And speaking of language learning, have you ever tried to learn a new language in a foreign country?
Oh, yes. I have had my fair share of language learning experiences, including trying to learn Arabic in Qatar.
Well, I'm sure our listeners can relate to that experience. But seriousness, language learning is a crucial aspect of education. And both Malaysia and Qatar offer a range of language programs for expats and locals alike.
That's right. And I think it's worth noting that both countries have a strong focus on education as a whole. Malaysia's education system is designed to promote critical and problem-solving skills, while Qatar's emphasis on language learning is driven by its cultural heritage.
I'm curious, have you ever had any experience with educational institutions in Malaysia or Qatar? Or that has stood out to you? Perhaps a particular university or school that you would recommend?
Well, I did have a memorable experience with a university in Qatar that offered a unique blend of traditional and modern education. It was a really innovative approach to learning.
Well, that sounds like a really forward approach to education. And I think it's worth noting that both countries have a range of educational institutions that offer high-quality education and language learning programs.
That's right. And I think it's worth noting that both countries have a strong focus on education as a whole. Malaysia's education system is designed to promote critical and problem-solving skills, while Qatar's emphasis on language learning is driven by its cultural heritage.
Well, I think it's clear that both countries have a lot to offer when it comes to education and language learning. And speaking of language learning, have you ever tried to navigate a language barrier in a foreign country?
Oh, yes. I have had my fair share of language learning experiences, including trying to order food in Arabic.
Well, I'm sure our listeners can relate to that experience. But, in all seriousness, language learning is a crucial aspect of education. And both Malaysia and Qatar offer a range of language programs for expats and locals alike.
That's right. And I think it's worth noting that both countries have a strong focus on education as a whole. Malaysia's education system is designed to promote critical and problem-solving skills, while Qatar's emphasis on language learning is driven by its cultural heritage.
I'm curious, have you ever had any experience with educational institutions in Malaysia or Qatar, or that has stood out to you? Perhaps a particular university or school that you would recommend?
Well, I did have a memorable experience with a university in Qatar that offered a unique blend of traditional and modern education. It was a really innovative approach to learning.
Wow, that sounds like a really forward approach to education. And I think it's worth noting that both countries have a range of educational institutions that offer high-quality education and language learning programs.
That's right. And I think it's worth noting that both countries have a strong focus on education as a whole. Malaysia's education system is designed to promote critical and problem-solving skills, while Qatar's emphasis on language learning is driven by its cultural heritage.
Well, I'm loving the tropical vibes of Malaysia. Don't you? Leo? The temperature is just right. Not too hot. Not too cold.
Ah, yes. But have you seen the humidity levels? It's like walking into a sauna. Mira, our listeners might be. How do they manage in this heat?
Well, they're used to it. Leo, the locals have adapted to the climate so well. They even have a saying, "Hari hari panas" or "hot day." Hot day. I'm certain our listeners living in Malaysia would agree with me that it's just part of the charm.
That's true. But I'm curious. Mira, how do they handle the monsoon season? I've heard it can get pretty intense.
Ah, yes. The monsoon. It's like a big show. Leo, the rain comes pouring down, and the streets flood. But the Malaysians are prepared. They have these amazing waterproof umbrellas that can withstand the downpour.
That's brilliant. I've seen those umbrellas, and they're like little rockets. But seriously, Mira, how do they deal with the extreme weather events like floods and landslides?
Well, Leo, they have a great system in place. They have these early warning systems that alert them to potential floods. And they also have a strong infrastructure to prevent landslides. The locals are very resourceful. They know how to navigate the floods and landslides with ease.
I see. That's impressive. And what about Qatar? Mira, how does it compare to Malaysia in terms of climate and seasonal conditions?
Qatar, a whole different story. Leo, it's like a desert wonderland. They have these massive sandstorms that can last for days. And the temperature can drop dramatically at night.
Whoa, that sounds intense. I've heard that Qatar has some of the hottest temperatures in the world. How do they manage to stay cool in the summer?
Well, Leo, they have these amazing air-conditioned buildings and cars that can withstand the heat. And they also have these traditional Arabic houses with thick walls that keep the heat out. It's like a mini oasis in the desert.
That's fascinating. Mira, and what about the winter season in Qatar? Do they get any snow?
Oh, Leo, no snow in Qatar. But they do get some cool mornings. And the temperature can drop to around 10 degrees Celsius at night. It's like a little winter wonderland, minus the snow.
I see. And how do the Qataris adapt to the extreme weather conditions? Mira?
Well, Leo, they're very resilient. They have these amazing traditional clothing that keeps them cool in the summer and warm in the winter. And they also have these wonderful cultural traditions that help them cope with the heat and the cold.
I'm impressed. Mira? And what about the cultural impact of the climate and seasonal conditions in both countries? How do they shape the lifestyle and culture?
That's a great question. Leo, in Malaysia, the climate has influenced the local cuisine. With dishes like laksa and char kway wai too are designed to be eaten during the hot weather. And in Qatar, the desert climate has inspired the traditional Arabic architecture and art.
That's fascinating. Mira, and what about our listeners? Leo, have you thought about how they might be affected by the climate and seasonal conditions in these countries?
Yes. Leo! I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Do they have any tips or advice for coping with the extreme weather conditions in these countries?
Well, Mira, I think our listeners would agree that the best way to cope with the heat and the cold is to stay hydrated and wear the right clothing. And if you're traveling to these countries, make sure to pack accordingly.
That's great advice. Leo, and what about who might be living in these countries? Do they have any tips for navigating the climate and seasonal conditions?
Yes. Mira, I think our listeners would agree that the key to navigating the climate and seasonal conditions in these countries is to be prepared and flexible. And don't forget to stay cool and hydrated, especially during the hot weather.
That's excellent advice. Leo, and I think that's all the time we have for today's topic. Climate and seasonal conditions. Thanks for joining us. Everyone.
And don't forget to stay tuned for our next topic. Mira.
I'm certain that our listeners living in Malaysia would agree with me when I say that food culture is a significant part of the country's identity. The diversity of flavors and dishes is simply incredible. And I'm to explore the similarities and differences with Qatar.
I couldn't agree more. Mira, Malaysian cuisine is a perfect blend of Malay, Chinese, and Indian flavors. But I have to ask, have you ever tried the infamous nasi lemak, the national dish of Malaysia?
Oh yes, I've had my fair share of nasi lemak. And I must say, it's a game changer. The combination of coconut milk, pandan leaves, and spicy sambal is a match made in heaven. But I'm curious. Leo, what's your take on the Qatari cuisine?
Well, Mira, Qatari cuisine is quite unique, with a strong emphasis on Arabic and Middle Eastern flavors. I'm particularly fond of the shawarma and kebabs, which are a staple in many Qatari restaurants.
Oh, I love shawarma. And I've heard that Qatar has a thriving food scene, with many international restaurants and cafes. But I'm curious, what's the deal with the street food in Malaysia? Is it really as affordable and delicious as everyone says?
Mira, you're asking the right questions. Malaysian street food is indeed a treasure trove of flavors and affordability. From char kway to atu hawker centers, the variety is endless, and the prices are ridiculously low. I'm sure our listeners would agree that trying street food in Malaysia is a must-do experience.
I'm sure you're right, Leah. And I'm curious, what about the health aspects of food culture in these two countries? Are there any significant differences or similarities in terms of nutritional alternatives?
That's a great question. Mira, both Malaysia and Qatar have a strong emphasis on healthy eating, with many restaurants and cafes offering nutritious options. However, I've noticed that Qatar has a more developed wellness culture, with many gyms and fitness centers catering to the expat community.
That's fascinating. Leo, I've heard that Malaysia has a growing wellness scene as well, but it's more focused on traditional medicine and natural remedies. I'm curious, have you tried any of the local herbal remedies or traditional medicine in Malaysia?
Mira, you're always pushing me to try new things. Yes, I have tried some of the local herbal remedies. And I must say, they're quite interesting. But I'm sure our listeners would agree that it's always best to consult with a medical professional before trying any new remedies.
Absolutely, Leo. And I'm sure our listeners would also agree that trying new foods and flavors is a big part of the fun in exploring a new culture. So let's get back to the topic at hand, food, culture, and nutritional alternatives in Malaysia and Qatar.
Yes. And I have to say, I'm loving the conversation so far. Mira, you're really bringing out the best in me.
Well, thanks. I think it's time for us to dive deeper into the world of Malaysian and Qatari cuisine. So, let's talk about the similarities and differences between the two countries' food cultures.
Yes. I think that's a great idea. Mira, and I'm curious. What do you think are the most significant differences between the two countries' food cultures?
Oh, I think it's the use of spices and herbs. Leo, Malaysian cuisine is all about the bold and aromatic flavors of spices like cumin, coriander, and chili peppers, while Qatari cuisine is more focused on the simplicity and richness of Arabic spices like cumin, coriander, and cardamom.
I see what you mean, Mira. But I think there's more to it than just the spices. I think it's also about the cultural influences and traditions that shape the food culture in each country.
Absolutely, Leo. And I'm sure our listeners would agree that food culture is a reflection of a country's history, traditions, and values.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today, Mira. But I'm curious. What do you think our listeners would like to know more about when it comes to food culture and nutritional alternatives in Malaysia and Qatar?
That's a great question. Leo, I think our listeners would love to know more about the traditional medicine and natural remedies used in Malaysia, as well as the healthy eating options available in Qatar.
I agree, Mira. And I'm sure our listeners would also appreciate any tips or recommendations for trying new foods and flavors in both countries.
Oh, I have a few tips up my sleeve. Leo, let's see. I think our listeners would love to know more about the best places to try traditional Malaysian dishes like char kway to hawker centers, as well as the best restaurants and cafes in Qatar for healthy eating.
Mira, you're always full of surprises. I think our listeners would also appreciate any advice on how to navigate the local food markets and try new foods in both countries.
Absolutely, Leo. And I'm sure our listeners would also love to know more about the cultural influences and traditions that shape the food culture in each country.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today. Mira, But I'm curious. What do you think our listeners would like to know more about when it comes to food culture and nutritional alternatives in Malaysia and Qatar?
I think our listeners would love to know more about the local food traditions and customs in both countries, as well as the best ways to try new foods and flavors in a safe and healthy way.
I agree. Mia, and I'm sure our listeners would also appreciate any tips or recommendations for trying new foods and flavors in both countries.
Oh, I have a few tips up my sleeve. Leo, let's see. I think our listeners would love to know more about the best places to try traditional Malaysian dishes like char kway way to Antoka centers, as well as the best restaurants and cafes in Kat offer healthy eating.
Mia, you're always full.
I'm to dive into the rich historical, cultural, and artistic values of Malaysia and Qatar, two countries that have captivated me with their unique blend of ancient traditions and modern flair. Jet off. I love uncovering stories like this. And so do we. Let's start with Malaysia, where the vibrant city of Georgetown is a treasure trove of colonial history and cultural fusion.
Malaysia, a true melting pot of cultures, where the scent of incense wafts through the streets of Penang, and the sounds of traditional music fill the air. I'm reminded of the iconic street art in Georgetown, which has become a symbol of the city's creative spirit.
Exactly. The street art scene in Georgetown is a reflection of the city's vibrant cultural landscape, where artists from around the world come together to create stunning murals and installations. And speaking of art, Malaysia is also home to the National Museum, which houses an impressive collection of Malaysian art and artifacts.
That's right. The National Museum is a treasure trove of Malaysian history and culture, with exhibits that showcase everything from ancient ceramics to modern art. And did you know that Malaysia has a thriving art scene, with numerous galleries and museums throughout the country?
That's fascinating. Qatar, on the other hand, has a rich cultural heritage that is deeply rooted in its Islamic traditions. The country's capital, Doha, is home to the stunning Museum of Islamic Art, which features an impressive collection of Islamic art and artifacts from around the world.
Yes. The Museum of Islamic Art is a breathtaking example of Islamic architecture and design, with its stunning domes and intricate details. And Qatar's cultural scene is not limited to just the Museum of Islamic Art. The country has a thriving art scene, with numerous galleries and museums that showcase the work of local and international artists.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. Leo, Qatar's cultural scene is indeed thriving, with a focus on preserving and promoting the country's rich cultural heritage. And speaking of heritage, Malaysia has a unique tradition of cultural festivals, such as the Taxation Festival, which is a spectacular display of Hindu and Buddhist traditions.
That's right. Taxation is a truly unforgettable experience, with its elaborate processions and colorful decorations. And did you know that Qatar has its own unique cultural festivals, such as the Qatar International Food Festival, which celebrates the country's diverse culinary traditions?
Yes. The Qatar International Food Festival is a fantastic celebration of the country's culinary heritage, with a focus on traditional Qatari cuisine and cultural traditions. And speaking of traditions, Malaysia has a rich cultural tradition of storytelling, with oral histories that date back centuries.
That's fascinating. Qatar also has a rich tradition of storytelling, with a focus on preserving the country's oral histories and cultural traditions. And did you know that both Malaysia and Qatar have a strong focus on preserving their cultural heritage through education and cultural programs?
That's right. Education and cultural programs are essential for preserving the cultural heritage of both countries. And speaking of education, Malaysia has a unique tradition of cultural education, with a focus on teaching the country's rich cultural heritage to future generations.
Yes. Qatar also has a strong focus on cultural education, with a focus on teaching the country's rich cultural heritage to future generations. And did you know that both Malaysia and Qatar have a thriving expat community, with a focus on preserving and promoting the cultural heritage of both countries?
That's fascinating. The expat community in both Malaysia and Qatar plays a vital role in preserving and promoting the cultural heritage of both countries. And speaking of heritage, I'm curious to know what our listeners think about the cultural heritage of these two countries. If you think this is wrong, please let us know in the comments.
Ah, yes. We'd love to hear from our listeners and learn more about their experiences with the cultural heritage of Malaysia and Qatar. And finally, I'd like to say that both Malaysia and Qatar are truly unique countries with a rich cultural heritage that is waiting to be explored.
Well, there you have it. Folks, Malaysia and Qatar, two countries that are steeped in history, culture, and artistic values. Jet off. AI loves uncovering stories like this, and we hope you've enjoyed this journey with us. I'm so to dive into the natural beauties and landscapes of Malaysia and Qatar. Both countries have unique and breathtaking landscapes that will leave you in awe. Let's start with Malaysia, which is home to some of the most stunning islands in the world.
Ah, yes. Malaysia's islands are a paradise for beach lovers. The crystal clear waters, white sandy beaches, and vibrant coral reefs are a sight to behold. But, Mira, have you ever tried to navigate through the islands? It's like a treasure hunt. And I'm not just talking about the treasure, I'm talking about the delicious seafood.
Oh, Leo, you're always about food. But seriously, Malaysia's islands are a treasure trove of marine life. From snorkeling and diving to simply relaxing on the beach, there's something for everyone. And let's not forget about the unique wildlife that calls Malaysia home, like the proboscis monkeys and the Malayan tiger.
Ah, yes. The proboscis monkeys, they're quite the characters, aren't they? But, Mira, I think you're forgetting about the mountains. Malaysia has some of the most beautiful mountain ranges in the world, like the Titiwang Sa Mountains and the Cameron Highlands. They offer breathtaking views, hiking trails, and even tea plantations.
Oh, Leo, you're absolutely right. The mountains in Malaysia are a haven for nature lovers and adventure seekers. And have you ever tried the tea from the Cameron Highlands? It's like sipping liquid gold. But let's move on to Qatar, which is home to some of the most stunning deserts in the world.
Ah, yes. The deserts of Qatar. They're like nothing you've ever seen before. The dunes stretch as far as the eye can see, and the sunsets are simply breathtaking. And, Mira, have you ever tried camel riding in the desert? It's like a whole new level of adventure.
Oh, Leo, you're always about adventure. But seriously, Qatar's deserts are a unique and fascinating landscape. And let's not forget about the unique cultural heritage of Qatar, which is reflected in its traditional architecture and rich history.
Ah, yes. The cultural heritage of Qatar. It's like a treasure trove of history and tradition. And, Mia, have you ever visited the Souk Waqif in Doha? It's like stepping back in time, the traditional markets, the vibrant colors, and the delicious food.
Oh, Leo, you're absolutely right. The Souk Waqif is a must-visit destination in Qatar. And let's not forget about the beautiful beaches and crystal clear waters of Qatar, which are perfect for swimming and snorkeling.
Ah, yes. The beaches of Qatar. They're like a secret paradise only accessible to those who know where to look. But, Mira, I think you're forgetting about the unique ecosystems of Qatar, like the mangrove forests and the coral reefs.
Oh, Leo, you're always about the details. But seriously, Qatar's unique ecosystems are a fascinating aspect of its natural beauty. And let's not forget about the conservation efforts that are being made to protect these ecosystems.
Yes, the conservation efforts in Qatar. They're like a beacon of hope for the future, protecting the natural beauty of Qatar for generations to come.
Well, I think that's all the time we have for today's topic. I'm sure our listeners will agree that both Malaysia and Qatar have some of the most stunning natural beauties and landscapes in the world. And, Leo, I'm curious, what do you think is the most unique aspect of the natural beauty of these two countries?
Mira, that's a tough one. But if I had to choose, I'd say it's the unique combination of mountains, deserts, and coastlines in both countries. It's like a treasure trove of natural wonders, each one more breathtaking than the last.
Well, I think that's a great note to end on. Thanks for joining us on this journey through the natural beauties and landscapes of Malaysia and Qatar. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast for more exciting topics and fascinating discussions. Let's dive into the world of sports and adventure in Malaysia and Qatar, from national sports to outdoor pursuits. These countries have a lot to offer. I'm to share my experiences and insights with you.
Malaysia is a paradise for sports enthusiasts. With its tropical climate and diverse landscapes, from hiking and rock climbing to water sports like surfing and kayaking, there's something for every thrill seeker.
I completely agree. Leo. And let's not forget about the national sport of Malaysia, sepak takraw. It's a thrilling game that combines elements of volleyball and gymnastics.
Ah, yes. I had the chance to watch a live match of sepak takraw, and it was incredible. The energy of the crowd and the skill of the players were really impressive.
I'm sure our listeners would love to experience the thrill of sepak takraw firsthand. Leo, have you had a chance to try it out yourself?
Actually, I have. And let me tell you, it's not as easy as it looks. But the locals were very welcoming and helped me improve my skills.
That's great to hear. Leo, I'm sure our listeners would appreciate the opportunity to try out sepak takraw for themselves. In Qatar, the focus is more on traditional sports like camel racing and falconry.
Yes, Qatar has a rich cultural heritage when it comes to sports. And I must say, watching a camel racing event was a unique experience.
I'm sure it was. Leo, and I'm curious, have you had a chance to try out falconry in Qatar?
Actually, I did, and it was an exhilarating experience. The thrill of flying a falcon and hunting with it is truly exhilarating.
Well, that sounds amazing. I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about your experience with falconry in Qatar.
Of course. Mira, and speaking of adventure, both Malaysia and Qatar offer a range of outdoor activities like hiking, rock climbing, and zip lining.
Ah, yes. I've had the chance zip lining in Malaysia, and it was an adrenaline rush like no other.
I can imagine. Mira, but what about our listeners who might not be as adventurous? Are there still plenty of options for them to enjoy the great outdoors in Malaysia and Qatar?
Absolutely. Both countries have plenty of national parks and wildlife reserves where visitors can enjoy hiking, bird watching, and other outdoor activities.
That's great to hear. Mira, and I'm sure our listeners would appreciate the opportunity to explore the natural beauty of Malaysia and Qatar.
So, let's talk about the active lifestyles in both countries. How do the locals stay active and healthy?
That's a great question. Yeah, in Malaysia, the locals are very active, and you'll often see them jogging or cycling in the mornings.
That's right. And in Qatar, the focus is more on traditional sports like camel racing and falconry, which require a high level of fitness and skill.
Yes, Qatar has a strong emphasis on physical fitness and sports, and it's not uncommon to see locals engaging in sports like football and basketball.
I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about the sports scene in Qatar. Leo, have you had a chance to try out any of the sports popular in Qatar?
Actually, I have. And let me tell you, it's not as easy as it looks. But the locals were very welcoming and helped me improve my skills.
That's great to hear. Leo, I'm sure our listeners would appreciate the opportunity to try out sports like football and basketball in Qatar.
Of course. Yeah. And speaking of sports, I'm curious. Have you had a chance to try out any of the traditional sports in Malaysia?
Actually, I have. And let me tell you, it's not as easy as it looks. But the locals were very welcoming and helped me improve my skills.
I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about your experience with traditional sports in Malaysia.
Well, I think that's all the time we have for today's topic. But before we go, I'm curious, have you noticed any differences in the sports and adventure scene between Malaysia and Qatar?
Actually, I have. While both countries offer a range of outdoor activities and sports, I think Malaysia has a more diverse range of options.
That's an interesting point. Leo, I think what Malaysia has is a more laid-back approach to sports and adventure, whereas Qatar has a more formal and structured approach.
Ah, I see what you mean, Mira. But I think both countries have their own unique charm and attractions when it comes to sports and adventure.
Well, I think that's a great note to end on. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this topic. We hope you've enjoyed learning about the sports and adventures seen in Malaysia and Qatar.
And don't forget to share your thoughts and experiences with us in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you.
That's all for now. Folks, until next time, stay active and adventurous.
And don't forget to try out sepak takraw and falconry in Malaysia and Qatar.
I'm telling you, Leah, Malaysia's nightlife is a vibrant explosion of colors and sounds. From the iconic night markets to the bustling streets of Kuala Lumpur, there's no shortage of excitement.
I've heard that. Mira, but what about Qatar? Don't they have some amazing nightlife scenes too? I mean, who wouldn't want to party in a place with such luxurious amenities?
Yes. Qatar does have its fair share of upscale nightlife. But let me tell you, it's a different vibe altogether. In Malaysia, you can find everything from rooftop bars to underground clubs, all serving up a unique blend of local flavors and international beats.
That sounds amazing. But I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the specific nightlife scenes in each country. Can you tell us a bit more about the popular spots in Malaysia?
Of course. Leo, one of the most famous night markets in Malaysia is the Jalan Night Market in Kuala Lumpur. It's a sensory overload in the best possible way, with street food, live music, and even some quirky shopping stalls.
Wow, that sounds incredible. And what about Qatar? Do they have anything similar?
Actually, Qatar has its own unique take on night markets, but instead of food and shopping, they focus on traditional Middle Eastern entertainment. For example, the so-called Youth Night Market in Doha offers a range of activities, from camel riding to henna painting.
That's fascinating. I'm sure our listeners are eager to know more about the entertainment options in both countries. Can you tell us about some of the popular shows and performances in Malaysia?
Yes. Malaysia has a thriving arts scene, and one of the most popular forms of entertainment is the traditional Malay dance performance. You can find these performances at various cultural centers and festivals throughout the country.
That sounds amazing. And what about Qatar? Do they have any similar cultural performances?
Actually, Qatar, a rich cultural heritage, and one of the most popular forms of entertainment is the traditional Arabic dance performance. You can find these performances at various festivals and cultural events throughout the country.
I'm impressed by the range of cultural performances in both countries. But what about the more modern forms of entertainment? Can you tell us about some of the popular nightclubs and bars in Malaysia?
Yes. Malaysia has a lively nightlife scene, and one of the most popular nightclubs is the Zerk Club in Kuala Lumpur. It's a world-class club that attracts top DJs and performers from around the globe.
That sounds amazing. And what about Qatar? Do they have any similar nightclubs?
Actually, Qatar has a more subdued nightlife scene, but they do have some great bars and clubs that offer a more relaxed atmosphere. For example, the W Hotel in Doha has a fantastic rooftop bar that offers stunning views of the city.
I'm sure our listeners are eager to know more about the nightlife options in both countries. Can you tell us about some of the popular festivals and events in Malaysia?
Yes. Malaysia has a vibrant festival scene, and one of the most popular festivals is the Taxation Festival. It's a Hindu festival that celebrates the arrival of the full moon, and it's a truly unforgettable experience.
That sounds incredible. And what about Qatar? Do they have any similar festivals?
Actually, Qatar has its own unique take on festivals, but instead of cultural celebrations, they focus on more modern events. For example, the Qatar International Food Festival is a popular event that showcases the best of international cuisine.
I'm impressed by the range of festivals and events in both countries. But what about the more unusual forms of entertainment? Can you tell us about some of the unique experiences in Malaysia?
Yes. Malaysia has a range of unique experiences that are definitely worth trying. For example, you can take a traditional Malay dance class or even try your hand at cooking some local dishes.
That sounds amazing. And what about Qatar? Do they have any similar unique experiences?
Actually, Qatar has its own unique take on experiences. But instead of traditional performances, they focus on more modern activities. For example, you can take a camel ride through the desert or even try your hand at falconry.
I'm sure our listeners are eager to know more about the unique experiences in both countries. Can you tell us about some of the popular tourist attractions in Malaysia?
Ah, yes. Malaysia has a range of popular tourist attractions, from the iconic Petronas wind towers to the beautiful beaches of Penang.
That sounds incredible. And what about Qatar? Do they have any similar tourist attractions?
Actually, Qatar has its own unique take on tourist attractions, but instead of beaches and skyscrapers, they focus on more traditional sites. For example, the Museum of Islamic Art in Doha is a must-visit attraction that showcases some of the world's most beautiful Islamic art.
I'm impressed by the range of tourist attractions in both countries. But what about the more offbeat experiences? Can you tell us about some of the quirky attractions in Malaysia?
Yes. Malaysia has a range of quirky attractions that are definitely worth trying. For example, you can visit the Batu Caves, which are a series of limestone caves that are home to a large Hindu population.
That sounds amazing. And what about Qatar? Do they have any similar quirky attractions?
Actually, Qatar's own unique take on quirky attractions. But instead of caves, they focus on more modern sites. For example, the Qatar National Museum is a unique attraction that showcases some of the country's most fascinating history.
I'm sure our listeners are eager to know more about the quirky attractions in both countries. Can you tell us about some of the best places to visit in Malaysia?
Yes. Malaysia has a range of must-visit places, from the beautiful Cameron Highlands to the vibrant city of Kuala Lumpur.
That sounds incredible. And what about Qatar? Do they have any similar must-visit places?
Actually, Qatar's own unique take on must-visit places. But instead of beaches and cities, they focus on more traditional sites. For example, the so-called If Market in Doha is a must-visit attraction that offers a range of traditional Middle Eastern goods.
I'm impressed by the range of must-visit places in both countries. But what about the more luxurious experiences? Can you tell us about some of the high-end hotels in Malaysia?
Yes. Malaysia has a range of luxurious hotels, from the iconic Shangri-La Hotel in Kuala Lumpur to the stunning Four Seasons Resort in Langkawi.
That sounds amazing. And what about Qatar? Do they have any similar high-end hotels?
Actually, Qatar has its own unique take on high-end hotels, but instead of luxury resorts, they focus on more modern amenities. For example, the Four Seasons Hotel in Doha is I'm certain our listeners are eager to learn about family-friendly environments and children's activities in Malaysia and Qatar. Let's dive in and explore the unique ways these countries nurture kids and strengthen family life.
That's right. Mira, both countries have a lot to offer in terms of family-friendly attractions. In Malaysia, the National Zoo in Kuala Lumpur is a must-visit, with its lush gardens and diverse animal species.
I heard great things about the National Zoo. But what about Qatar? I'm curious to know more about their family-friendly activities.
Well, Qatar has a great selection of museums, such as the Museum of Islamic Art, which is perfect for kids who love history and culture.
The Museum of Islamic Art is indeed a treasure trove of knowledge and art. But what about outdoor activities? I'm sure our listeners would love to know about some fun outdoor spots for families in Qatar.
Yes. Qatar has some amazing outdoor spots, such as the Qatari Cultural Village, which offers a range of activities, including arts and crafts, music, and dance performances.
That sounds like a fantastic spot for families to spend the day. And I'm sure our listeners would love some popular family-friendly restaurants in Qatar.
Actually, Mira, it's kind of late to talk about that. I've heard that the Sokwak Youth in Doha is a great place for families to grab a meal together. The atmosphere is lively, and there are plenty of options for kids.
So Kuopuyif is indeed a vibrant and lively spot. And I'm sure our listeners would appreciate some insider tips on where to eat in Qatar. Let's move on to Malaysia and explore some of the country's top family-friendly destinations.
Sounds good. Mira, in Malaysia, the Genting Highlands is a popular spot for families, with its theme park, snow world, and other attractions.
I've heard great things about Genting Highlands. But what about some more off-the-beaten-path family-friendly activities in Malaysia?
Actually, Mira, I've heard that the Cameron Highlands is a great spot for families to explore. With its tea plantations, waterfalls, and hiking trails.
The Cameron Highlands is indeed a beautiful spot, and I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about its attractions. Let's talk about some of the unique cultural experiences that families can have in Malaysia.
Yes. Malaysia has a rich cultural heritage, and families can experience it firsthand by attending a traditional festival or celebration, such as the Taxation Festival.
Taxation is indeed a unique and fascinating festival, and I'm sure our listeners would appreciate some insight into its significance and traditions.
Absolutely. Mira, and speaking of traditions, Qatar has its own unique cultural experiences that families can enjoy, such as the Qatar International Food Festival.
The Qatar International Food Festival sounds like a culinary delight, and I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about its offerings and traditions.
Well, Mira, I think we've covered a lot of ground in terms of family-friendly environments and children's activities in Malaysia and Qatar.
That's right. Leo! And I'm sure our listeners will appreciate the insider tips and recommendations we've shared. If you're a family living in either Malaysia or Qatar, or if you're planning a trip to either country, I'm sure you'll find this information helpful.
Absolutely. Mira, and don't forget to share your own family-friendly experiences and recommendations in the comments below.
Great idea. Leo! And before we go, let's summarize some of the key takeaways from our conversation today.
Sounds good. Mira, so, to recap, Malaysia has a lot to offer in terms of family-friendly attractions, including the National Zoo and Genting Highlands.
And Qatar has its own unique family-friendly activities, such as the Museum of Islamic Art and the Cultural Village.
That's right, Mira. And don't forget to check out the Sokwak Youth for some great family-friendly dining options.
Absolutely. Leo, and I'm sure our listeners will appreciate the insider tips and recommendations we've shared today.
Well, Mira, it's been great chatting with you about family-friendly environments and children's activities in Malaysia and Qatar.
Likewise. Leo, and I'm sure our listeners will enjoy the next episode of our podcast. Malaysia, a country known for its vibrant culture and rich history, has made significant strides in promoting LGBT inclusivity. I'm curious, Leo, what's your take on Malaysia's progress in this area?
Well, Mira, Malaysia has indeed taken steps to improve LGBT rights, but there's still a long way to go. I think it's essential to acknowledge the country's complex history and cultural nuances. For instance, the Sultan of Selangor, Muhammad Sharafuddin Shah, has been a vocal advocate for LGBT rights. But the government's stance on the issue remains inconsistent.
That's a great point. Leo, I think it's essential to recognize the efforts of individuals like the Sultan, who are working to create a more inclusive environment. And speaking of inclusivity, have you heard about the Merdeka Parade in Kuala Lumpur, which celebrates the country's independence and features a vibrant LGBT contingent?
Yes. The Merdeka Parade is an excellent example of Malaysia's growing LGBT community. But, Mira, let's not forget that the country still has a way to go in terms of legal protections. For instance, the anti-sodomy law, Section 377A, remains on the books, which can be a major obstacle for LGBT individuals.
Absolutely. Leo, and I'm certain that our listeners living in Malaysia would agree with me that there's still much work to be done. But I'd love to hear more about Qatar. our second country of comparison. What's your take on Qatar's LGBT-friendly atmosphere?
Well, Mira, Qatar has been making headlines in recent years for its increasingly conservative stance on LGBT issues. The country's strict Sharia laws and lack of legal protections make it a challenging environment for LGBT individuals. However, I think it's essential to note that Qatar has been hosting the World Cup, which has brought international attention to the country's LGBT community.
That's a great point. And I think it's essential to acknowledge the efforts of organizations like the Accommodation, which has been working to promote LGBT inclusivity and awareness. But I'd love to hear more about Malaysia's LGBT community. What's your favorite aspect of Malaysia's LGBT scene?
Mira, I think Malaysia's LGBT community is incredibly resilient and resourceful. From the vibrant nightlife in Kuala Lumpur to the thriving LGBT organizations in Penang, there's a sense of community and solidarity that's inspiring. And, of course, who can forget the famous Penang Pride Parade, which attracts thousands of participants every year?
That's fantastic. Leo, and I think it's essential to recognize the efforts of organizations like the Malaysian AIDS Council, which has been working tirelessly to promote HIV awareness and prevention. But I'd love to hear more about Qatar's LGBT community. What's your take on Qatar's response to international pressure to improve LGBT rights?
Well, Mira, Qatar has been under increasing pressure from international organizations and human rights groups to improve its LGBT rights record. However, the country's response has been mixed, to say the least. While Qatar has made some gestures towards inclusivity, such as hosting LGBT events and conferences, the country's strict laws and social attitudes remain a major obstacle for LGBT individuals.
That's a great point. Leo! And I think it's essential to acknowledge the challenges that LGBT individuals face in Qatar. But I'd love to hear more about Malaysia's response to international pressure to improve LGBT rights. What's your take on Malaysia's efforts to issue?
Well, Mira, Malaysia has been making efforts to improve its LGBT rights record, particularly in the wake of international pressure. For instance, the country has established the National Council for Anti-Discrimination, which aims to promote inclusivity and address discrimination against LGBT individuals.
That's fantastic. Leo, and I think it's essential to recognize the efforts of organizations like the Malaysian Bar, which has been working to promote LGBT inclusivity and awareness. But I'd love to hear more about Qatar's LGBT community. What's your favorite aspect of Qatar's LGBT scene?
Mira, I think Qatar's LGBT community is incredibly resourceful and resilient. From the thriving LGBT organizations in Doha to the vibrant nightlife in the city, there's a sense of community and solidarity that's inspiring. And, of course, who can forget the famous Doha Pride Parade, which attracts thousands of participants every year?
That's fantastic. Leah? And I think it's essential to recognize the efforts of organizations like the Foundation, which has been working to promote LGBT inclusivity and awareness. But I'd love to hear more about Malaysia's LGBT community. What's your take on Malaysia's response to international pressure to improve LGBT rights?
Well, Mira, Malaysia has been making efforts to improve its LGBT rights record, particularly in the wake of international pressure. However, the country's response has been inconsistent, to say the least. While Malaysia has established the National Council for Anti-Discrimination, the country's laws and social attitudes remain a major obstacle for LGBT individuals.
That's a great point, Leo. And I think it's essential to acknowledge the challenges that LGBT individuals face in Malaysia. But I'd love to hear more about Qatar's LGBT community. What's your favorite aspect of Qatar's LGBT scene?
Mira, I think Qatar's LGBT community is incredibly vibrant and diverse. From the thriving LGBT organizations in Doha to the vibrant nightlife in the city, there's a sense of community and solidarity that's inspiring. And, of course, Who can forget the famous Doha Pride Parade, which attracts thousands of participants every year?
That's fantastic. Leo, and I think it's essential to recognize the efforts of organizations like the Accommodation, which has been working to promote LGBT inclusivity and awareness. But I'd love to hear more about Malaysia's LGBT community. What's your take on Malaysia's response to international pressure to improve LGBT rights?
Well, Mira, Malaysia has been making efforts to improve its LGBT rights record, particularly in the wake of international pressure. However, the country's response has been inconsistent, to say the least. While Malaysia has established the National Council for Anti-Discrimination, the country's laws and social attitudes remain a major obstacle for LGBT individuals.
That's a great point, Leo. And I think it's essential to acknowledge the challenges that LGBT individuals face in Malaysia. But I'd love to hear more about Qatar's LGBT community. What's your favorite aspect of Qatar's LGBT scene?
Mira, I think Qatar's LGBT community is incredibly resilient and resourceful. From the thriving LGBT organizations in Doha to the vibrant nightlife in the city, there's a sense of community and solidarity that's inspiring. And, of course, who can forget the famous Doha Pride Parade, which attracts thousands?
So, let's talk about Malaysia's warm hospitality. I'm sure our listeners who visited this country would agree that the locals are incredibly welcoming. In fact, I had the most amazing experience at a wedding I attended. The food, the music, the dancing. It was like being part of the family.
That sounds incredible, and I'm sure the food was a highlight, right? I mean, Malaysian cuisine is famous for its bold flavors and spices. But what's interesting is that Malaysia's hospitality is not just limited to its food and culture. The people themselves are incredibly friendly and open-minded. In fact, I've heard that Malaysia is one of the most expat-friendly countries in Asia.
Exactly. And I think that's because Malaysians have a deep understanding of what it means to be a multicultural society. They've been influenced by various cultures, including Malay, Chinese, Indian, and even Western cultures. So very accepting of diversity and open to new experiences.
That's so true. And I think it's also reflected in their approach to integration. Malaysia has a very inclusive approach to integrating foreigners into their society. In fact, many Malaysians have married foreigners or have foreign-born children. So there's a strong sense of community and belonging among expats.
Oh, yes. And I think that's also reflected in the way Malaysians interact with foreigners. They're very direct and straightforward, but also very warm and welcoming. I remember when I was trying to learn some Malay phrases. A local approached me and started speaking to me in Malay. I was so touched by his kindness and willingness to help.
That's so typical of Malaysians. They're always willing to help out and make you feel at home. And I think that's also reflected in their approach to language. Many Malaysians speak multiple languages, including English, Malay, Chinese, and even Tamil.
Yes, it's amazing. And I think that's also one of the reasons why Malaysia is such a popular destination for tourists and expats. People love the warm hospitality, the delicious food, and the vibrant culture.
Absolutely. And I think it's also worth noting that Malaysia has a very strong sense of community and social responsibility. Many Malaysians are very involved in charitable work and community service. So, if you're looking for a country that's not just welcoming but also socially responsible, Malaysia is definitely a great choice.
That's so true. And I think it's also reflected in the way Malaysians celebrate their festivals and holidays. They're very inclusive and welcoming to foreigners. And it's not uncommon to see expats participating in local festivals and celebrations.
Yes. And I think that's also reflected in the way Malaysians approach their relationships with foreigners. They're very open-minded and willing to form friendships with people from different backgrounds and cultures.
And I think that's also reflected in the way Malaysians respond to criticism or more negative feedback. They're very open to feedback and willing to learn from others, which is a great quality in any society.
Absolutely. And I think it's also worth noting that Malaysia has a very strong sense of national identity and pride. Many Malaysians are very proud of their country and its culture, and they're always eager to share their heritage with foreigners.
Ah, yes. And I think that's also reflected in the way Malaysians approach their relationships with Qatar, our next country. But let's talk about Qatar's approach to hospitality and attitudes towards foreigners. What do you think? Leah?
Well, Qatar is a very different country from Malaysia. While Malaysia is known for its warm hospitality and welcoming culture, Qatar is more reserved and formal. That doesn't mean they're not welcoming to foreigners. In fact, Qatar has a very strong sense of tradition and respect for their culture, which is reflected in their approach to hospitality.
Yes. And I think that's also reflected in the way Qataris interact with foreigners. They're very polite and courteous, but also very formal. I've heard that Qatar is often used honorific titles when addressing foreigners, which can be a bit confusing at first.
Yes. And I think that's also reflected in the way Qataris approach their relationships with foreigners. They're very open-minded and willing to form friendships with people from different backgrounds and cultures. But they also value their cultural traditions and customs.
Yes. And I think that's also reflected in the way Qataris respond to criticism or negative feedback. They're very open to feedback and willing to learn from others, but they also value their independence and sovereignty.
Absolutely. And I think it's also worth noting that Qatar has a very strong sense of national identity and pride. Many Qataris are very proud of their country and its culture, and they're always eager to share their heritage with foreigners.
Yes. And I think that's also reflected in the way Qataris approach their relationships with Malaysia. In fact, Qatar and Malaysia have a very strong diplomatic relationship, with many Qatari companies investing in Malaysia and vice versa.
Yes. And I think that's also reflected in the way Qataris approach their relationships with expats. They're very welcoming and open-minded, but also very formal and respectful. I've heard that many expats in Qatar appreciate the warm hospitality and welcoming culture of the Qatari people.
Yes. And I think that's also reflected in the way Qataris celebrate their festivals and holidays. They're very inclusive and welcoming to foreigners. And it's not uncommon to see expats participating in local festivals and celebrations.
Yes. And I think that's also reflected in the way Qataris approach their language and culture. They're very proud of their Arabic heritage and language, and they're always eager to share their culture with foreigners.
Yes. And I think that's also reflected in the way Qataris respond to criticism or negative feedback. They're very open to feedback and willing to learn from others. But they also value their independence and sovereignty.
Absolutely. And I think it's also worth noting that Qatar has a very strong sense of community and social responsibility. Many Qataris are very involved in charitable work and community service.
I'm to dive into the world of internet, infrastructure and digital facilities in Malaysia and Qatar. As digital nomads, we've experienced firsthand the impact of a robust online ecosystem on our daily lives.
That's right. Malaysia, with its vibrant digital scene, has been a hub for tech-savvy individuals and entrepreneurs. The country's commitment to innovation has led to the development of smart cities and digital nomad-friendly infrastructure.
Absolutely. Malaysia's capital, Kuala Lumpur, is a prime example of a smart city. With its well-planned infrastructure and efficient public transportation system, the city's digital landscape is also characterized by a strong presence of co-working spaces and innovation hubs.
That's fascinating. Qatar, on the other hand, has made significant strides in developing its digital infrastructure, particularly in the areas of e-government and digital payments. The country's vision for a digital future is well on track, with initiatives like the Qatar Digital Government Strategy.
I'm impressed by Qatar's focus on digitalization. The country's use of blockchain technology, for instance, has streamlined processes and increased transparency in government services. It's a great example of how digital innovation can improve public services.
Indeed. And I'm sure our listeners would agree that having access to reliable internet is crucial for both personal and professional lives. Malaysia and Qatar have made significant investments in expanding their internet infrastructure, with both countries boasting high-speed networks and affordable internet plans.
That's right. Malaysia's internet penetration rate is one of the highest in Southeast Asia, with over 90% of the population having access to the internet. The country's digital infrastructure has also been upgraded to support the growing demand for high-speed internet.
Qatar, too, has made substantial investments in its internet infrastructure. The country's national fiber optic network, for instance, provides high-speed internet access to both government and private institutions.
I'm curious. Liao, have you had a chance to experience the digital nomad lifestyle in Malaysia or Qatar? What were your impressions of the internet infrastructure in these countries?
Well, Mira, I've had the pleasure of living in both countries, and I can say that the internet infrastructure in Malaysia is quite impressive. The country's co-working spaces and innovation hubs are designed to support the needs of digital nomads, with many offering high-speed internet, comfortable workspaces, and networking opportunities.
That's great to hear. Leo, and I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the digital nomad scene in these countries. Have you noticed any differences in the way digital nomads work and live in Malaysia versus Qatar?
Yes. While both countries have a strong digital nomad community, I've noticed that Malaysia has a more relaxed and laid-back atmosphere, which suits the needs of many digital nomads. Qatar, on the other hand, has a more formal and structured approach to work and life, which may appeal to those who prefer a more organized environment.
That's an interesting observation. I think it's also worth noting that both countries have their own unique digital ecosystems, with Malaysia having a stronger focus on innovation and entrepreneurship, while Qatar has a more emphasis on e-government and digital payments.
Exactly. Mira. And I think it's also worth mentioning that both countries have made significant strides in promoting digital literacy and education, which is essential for their citizens to fully benefit from the digital revolution.
Well, I'm sure our listeners would agree that digital literacy is crucial for navigating the complexities of the online world. And speaking of the online world, have you noticed any notable trends or developments in the digital landscape of Malaysia and Qatar?
Yes. One trend that I've noticed is the increasing popularity of e-commerce in both countries. Malaysia's e-commerce market, in particular, has been growing rapidly, with many local businesses adopting online platforms to reach a wider customer base.
That's fascinating. Leo, and I'm sure our listeners would be interested to know more about the e-commerce scene in Malaysia and Qatar. Have you had a chance to explore the online shopping options in these countries?
Well, Mira, I've had the pleasure of shopping online in both countries, and I can say that the experience has been quite seamless. Both countries have made significant investments in developing their e-commerce infrastructure, with many online payment systems and secure payment gateways available.
That's great to hear. Leo, and I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the digital payment systems in these countries. Have you noticed any notable differences in the way people pay for goods and services online in Malaysia versus Qatar?
Yes. While both countries have a strong focus on digital payments, I've noticed that Malaysia has a more diverse range of payment options, including mobile payments, online banking, and cryptocurrencies. Qatar, on the other hand, has a more limited range of payment options, with a strong focus on secure payment gateways and online payment systems.
That's an interesting observation. I think it's also worth noting that both countries have their own unique digital payment ecosystems, with Malaysia having a more decentralized approach to payments, while Qatar has a more centralized approach.
Exactly, Mira. And I think it's also worth mentioning that both countries have made significant strides in promoting digital inclusion and accessibility, particularly for marginalized communities.
Well, I'm sure our listeners would agree that digital inclusion is crucial for ensuring that all citizens have access to the benefits of the digital revolution. And speaking of benefits, have you noticed any notable advantages of the digital infrastructure in Malaysia and Qatar?
Yes. One advantage that I've noticed is the high-speed internet connectivity in both countries. This has enabled digital nomads and remote workers to stay connected and productive, even when working from coffee shops or co-working spaces.
That's great to hear, Leo. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the digital nomad scene in these countries. Have you noticed any notable differences in the way digital nomads work and live in Malaysia versus Qatar?
Well, Mira, I've noticed that Malaysia has a more relaxed and laid-back atmosphere, which suits the needs of many digital nomads. Qatar, on the other hand, has a more formal and structured approach to work and life, which may appeal to those who prefer a more organized environment.
That's an interesting observation, Leo. I think it's also worth noting that both countries have their own unique digital ecosystems, with Malaysia having a stronger focus on innovation and entrepreneurship, while Qatar has a more emphasis on e-government and digital payments.
Exactly, Mira. And I think it's also worth mentioning that both countries have made significant strides in promoting digital literacy and education, which is essential for their citizens to fully benefit from the digital revolution.
Well, I'm sure our listeners would agree that digital literacy is crucial for navigating the complexities of the online world. And speaking of the online world, have you noticed any notable trends or developments in the digital landscape of Malaysia and Qatar?
Yes. One trend that I've noticed is,
I'm absolutely loving the vibrant markets in Malaysia. Leo, the stores are just bursting with colorful fabrics, intricate crafts, and delicious street food. Have you ever tried the famous Malaysian satay?
oh, yes, I've had my fair share of satay, and it's always a treat. But let's talk about shopping opportunities in Malaysia. From high-end malls like Surya KLCC to bustling night markets like Johor and Alor, there's something for every budget and taste.
Exactly. And the prices are so reasonable, especially for the quality you get. I mean, I've seen some stunning silver jewelry in the markets that would cost an arm and a leg back home. Do you think our listeners would agree that Malaysia offers great value for money?
Absolutely, I do. And it's not just the markets. Even in the malls, you can find some amazing deals on luxury brands. I've seen some designer handbags for a fraction of the price you'd pay in Europe.
Wow, that's a great point. And let's not forget about the night markets. They're just so much fun to explore, with all the vendors calling out to you and the sights and smells of the food. Have you ever tried to haggle in one of those markets?
Oh, yes, I have. It's an art form, really. But, seriously, Mira, I think the key to shopping in Malaysia is to be willing to haggle. You can get some amazing deals if you're willing to negotiate.
That's so true. And it's not just about the prices. The people watching in those markets is just fantastic. I mean, you'll see locals and tourists alike, all haggling and laughing together. It's just such a lively atmosphere.
I know what you mean. And it's not just about the markets, either. Even in the malls, you'll see some amazing cultural performances and events. I've seen traditional Malaysian dance performances in some of the malls, and they're just incredible.
Well, that's a great point. And I think it's also worth mentioning that Malaysia has a really strong focus on sustainability and eco-friendliness. I've seen some amazing eco-friendly products in the markets, from reusable bags to bamboo toothbrushes.
That's really great to hear, Mira. And I think it's also worth noting that Qatar has some amazing shopping opportunities as well. From the high-end malls like Villa Gio to the traditional souks like Souk Wakiwith. There's something for every budget and taste.
Yes. I've heard great things about the souks in Qatar. And I've also heard that the prices are quite reasonable, especially for the quality you get. Have you ever tried to haggle in one of those souks?
Oh, yes, I have. It's a bit different from the markets in Malaysia, but still a lot of fun. And I think the key to shopping in Qatar is to be willing to try new things and explore the local culture.
That's so true. Leo, and I think it's also worth mentioning that Qatar has a really strong focus on luxury shopping. I've seen some amazing designer brands in the malls, from Louis Vuitton to Chanel.
Yes, Qatar is definitely a shopper's paradise. And I think it's also worth noting that both Malaysia and Qatar have a really strong focus on customer service. I've had some amazing experiences with shopkeepers and vendors in both countries.
Wow, that's a great point. And I think it's also worth mentioning that both countries have a really strong focus on cultural heritage and traditions. I've seen some amazing cultural performances and events in both countries.
Absolutely. Mira. And I think it's also worth noting that shopping in both countries can be a real adventure. Whether you're haggling in a market or browsing through a mall, there's always something new to discover.
I know what you mean, Leo. And I think it's also worth mentioning that both countries have a really strong focus on family-friendly shopping. I've seen some amazing kids play areas and entertainment options in both countries.
Yes, both countries are definitely great destinations for families. And I think it's also worth noting that the shopping opportunities in both countries are just a small part of the overall experience. From the food to the culture to the people, there's just so much to see and do in both Malaysia and Qatar.
Absolutely, Leo. And I think that's what makes shopping in both countries so special. It's not just about buying things. It's about experiencing the culture and the people. Hey there, folks. Let's dive into the vibrant world of cultural events, festivals, and concert opportunities in Malaysia and Qatar. Pleased to explore the rich traditions and global influences of these two amazing countries. I certainly am.
I know I am. Malaysia's got this incredible blend of Malay, Chinese, and Indian cultures, which creates a unique festival scene that's just amazing. And Qatar, with its Arabic heritage, offers a fascinating mix of traditional and modern events.
That's so true. In Malaysia, you have the Taxation Festival, which is a Hindu celebration where devotees carry colorful kavadis, or shoulder pieces, as an act of devotion. It's truly breathtaking to see.
Wow, I've heard about that. In Qatar, we have the Al-Akira Festival, which showcases the country's rich cultural heritage through music, dance, and traditional clothing. And let's not forget the Qatar International Food Festival, which brings together the best of international cuisine.
For more, check out Jetoff AI, where you can explore the various festivals and events happening in both countries. These insights could have been possible without Jetoff by referring to cultural trends.
Huh, that's a great point. Mira, but seriously, both countries have a lot to offer when it comes to cultural events. In Malaysia, you have the Penang Georgetown Festival, which celebrates the city's rich cultural heritage through music, theater, and visual arts.
I've heard that the festival features some amazing street performances. Leo, and in Qatar, we have the Doha International Jazz Festival, which brings together some of the world's top jazz musicians for a weekend of incredible music.
That sounds amazing. I'm sure our listeners living in Qatar would agree with me that the Jazz Festival is a highlight of the cultural calendar. And in Malaysia, the Kuala Lumpur Festival is a must-visit event, featuring music, dance, and theater performances from around the world.
Absolutely. Leo, the Kuala Lumpur Festival is a great way to experience the diversity of cultures in Malaysia. And let's not forget the annual Malaysia Food and Music Festival, which celebrates the country's rich culinary heritage.
I'm getting hungry just about the food. In Qatar, we have the Souk Waqif Nights, which is a weekly festival that takes place in the historic Souk Waqif area. It's a great way to experience the country's rich cultural heritage and try some delicious local cuisine.
That sounds like a great way to spend an evening. Leo, and in Malaysia, you have the annual Malaysia International Film Festival, which showcases the best of Malaysian cinema.
I've heard that the festival features some amazing short films and documentaries. And in Qatar, we have the Qatar International Film Festival, which brings together some of the world's top filmmakers for a weekend of incredible cinema.
I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the film festivals in both countries. If you think this is wrong, please let us know in the comments.
I'm sure we'll get some feedback from our listeners. But seriously, both countries have a lot to offer when it comes to cultural events and festivals. Whether you're interested in music, dance, theater, or food, there's something for everyone in Malaysia and Qatar.
That's so true. Leo. And let's not forget the rich cultural heritage of both countries, which is reflected in their festivals and events. These celebrations are a great way to experience the unique traditions and customs of each country.
Absolutely. Mira, and I'm sure our listeners would agree with me that the cultural events and festivals in Malaysia and Qatar are truly unforgettable experiences.
Well, next topic. Thanks for joining us on this journey through the cultural events and festivals of Malaysia and Qatar. Don't forget to check out Jet Off AI for more information on these amazing countries.
And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast for more exciting topics and conversations about travel, culture, and lifestyle.
So, let's talk about Malaysian Qatar when it comes to learning the local language. I'm curious. Leo, have you ever tried to learn a new language while traveling?
Yes, I have. And let me tell you, it's not as easy as it sounds. But Malaysia and Qatar are definitely the countries that make it a bit more accessible for language learners.
That's right. Malaysia has a lot of language schools and institutes that offer courses for foreigners. And the best part is, they're often very affordable.
Exactly. And it's not just about the schools. Nira, Malaysia has a very welcoming culture, and people are generally very open to helping foreigners learn the language.
Absolutely. And I found that the Malaysians are very patient with me when I'm trying to speak Malay. They'll often correct me gently and help me improve my pronunciation.
Yeah, I can imagine. But, seriously, Mira, Malaysia has a lot of resources available for language learners. From language exchange programs to cultural immersion experiences. There's no shortage of opportunities to practice your skills.
That's so true. And I've also found that the food in Malaysia is a great way to learn the language. You can try all sorts of local dishes and drinks, and the vendors will often speak to you in Malay.
Yeah, I've had my fair share of trying to order food in Malay, but it's all part of the learning process, right?
Exactly. And speaking of food, have you tried the traditional Malaysian breakfast dish? Nasi lemak.
Actually, I have. It's delicious. But I have to say, Mira, you're making me hungry just talking about it.
Sorry about that. But seriously, Leo, Malaysia has a lot to offer when it comes to learning the local language. And I think our listeners would agree with me.
I'm sure they would. Mira, and I think Qatar is also a great country for language learners. They have a lot of modern language schools and institutes that offer courses for foreigners.
That's right. And Qatar has a very modern and progressive culture, which makes it easy to adapt to. Plus, the people are very friendly and welcoming.
Absolutely. And I've found that the Qatari people are very proud of their culture and language, which makes it a lot of fun to learn.
That's so true. And I've also found that the Qatari language, Arabic, is a beautiful and expressive language. It's a lot of fun to try to speak and write in it.
Yeah, I can imagine. But, seriously, Mira, Qatar has a lot of resources available for language learners. From language exchange programs to cultural immersion experiences. There's no shortage of opportunities to practice your skills.
That's right. And I think our listeners would agree with me that both Malaysia and Qatar are great countries for language learners.
I'm sure they would. Mira, and I think it's worth noting that both countries have their own unique challenges when it comes to learning the local language.
That's a great point. Leo, and I think it's worth discussing some of the challenges that language learners might face in Malaysia and Qatar.
Absolutely. For example, in Malaysia, the language is Malay, which is a bit different from English. And in Qatar, the language is Arabic, which is a very complex and expressive language.
That's right. And I think it's worth noting that both languages have their own unique grammar and syntax rules.
Exactly. And it's not just about the language itself. Mira, the culture and customs of both countries can also be challenging for language learners to navigate.
Absolutely. And I think that's all part of the learning process, right? Learning about the culture and customs of a new country is a big part of learning the language.
That's right. Mira, and I think it's worth noting that both Malaysia and Qatar have a lot of resources available for language learners. From language exchange programs to cultural immersion experiences. There's no shortage of opportunities to practice your skills.
That's right. And I think our listeners would agree with me that both Malaysia and Qatar are great countries for language learners.
I'm sure they would. Mira, and I think it's worth noting that both countries have their own unique approach to language education.
That's a great point. And I think it's worth discussing some of the unique approaches to language education in Malaysia and Qatar.
Absolutely. For example, in Malaysia, there are a lot of language schools and institutes that offer courses for foreigners. And in Qatar, there are a lot of modern language schools and institutes that offer courses for foreigners.
That's right. And I think it's worth noting that both countries have a lot of resources available for language learners. From language exchange programs to cultural immersion experiences, there's no shortage of opportunities to practice your skills.
Exactly. And I think it's worth noting that both Malaysia and Qatar have a lot to offer when it comes to learning the local language.
That's right. And I think our listeners would agree with me that both Malaysia and Qatar are great countries for language learners.
I'm sure they would. Mira, and I think it's worth noting that both countries have their own unique approach to language education.
That's a great point, Leo. And I think it's worth discussing some of the unique approaches to language education in Malaysia and Qatar.
Absolutely. For example, in Malaysia, there are a lot of language schools and institutes that offer courses for foreigners. And in Qatar, there are a lot of modern language schools and institutes that offer courses for foreigners.
That's right. And I think it's worth noting that both countries have a lot of resources available for language learners. From language exchange programs to cultural immersion experiences, there's no shortage of opportunities to practice your skills.
Exactly. And I think it's worth noting that both Malaysia and Qatar have a lot to offer when it comes to learning the local language.
That's right. And I think our listeners would agree with me that both Malaysia and Qatar are great countries for language learners.
I'm sure they would. Mira.
I'm certain that our listeners living in Malaysia would agree with me when I say that safety and comfort for women travelers are top priorities. Malaysia has made significant strides in ensuring women feel welcome and secure. From the vibrant city of Kuala Lumpur to the beautiful beaches of Penang. But let's get real. Guys, no place is perfect. And we've got to talk about the not so great stuff too.
Malaysia. A country where the streets are bustling with life. And the food is, well, a life-changing experience. But seriously, Mira, what's the deal with harassment statistics in Malaysia? I've heard some alarming numbers, and I'm not sure if I should be laughing or crying.
Okay. Let's not get you down in the dumps just yet. According to the Malaysia police, reported cases of harassment have actually decreased in recent years. But we can't just pat ourselves on the back and say, job well done. We need to keep pushing for change, especially when it comes to cultural attitudes towards women.
That's true, Mira. And I've got a personal experience to share. I was walking through the streets of Kuala Lumpur with a friend, and we got catcalled by a group of guys. Now, I'm not saying it's the end of the world, but it was definitely uncomfortable. And the weird thing is, my friend and I were both wearing hijabs, so it's not like we were flaunting anything.
I totally get what you're saying. And it's not just about the clothes we wear. It's about the way we're treated as women in public spaces. But let's talk about something positive for a change. In Malaysia, there are some amazing community initiatives that support women's safety and empowerment. Have you heard about the Sisters in Islam organization?
Yes. I've heard great things about that organization. They're all about promoting gender equality and challenging patriarchal norms in Malaysian society. I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. If you have any experiences or insights, please share them in the comments below.
Exactly. And speaking of experiences, I've got a story to share. I was visiting the Batu Caves in Kuala Lumpur, and I noticed that there were some women-only areas in the temple complex. It was amazing to see how the temple authorities were catering to the needs of women visitors.
That's really cool, Mira. And it's great to see that Malaysia is taking steps to address the needs of women travelers. But what about Qatar, our second country? How does it compare when it comes to safety and comfort for women?
Qatar is a whole different ballgame. Leo, While Malaysia has its own set of challenges, Qatar has made significant strides in terms of women's rights and safety. From the Doha Metro to the beautiful beaches of the Cut Line, women can feel safe and welcome.
That's great to hear. Mira, and I've got some info to share. Did you know that Qatar has a special task force dedicated to investigating and preventing harassment against women?
Wow, that's impressive. And I've got some personal experiences to share too. When I visited Qatar, I was amazed by the kindness and hospitality of the locals. Everywhere I went, I felt welcome and respected.
I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about Qatar's approach to women's safety. Do you think it's a model for other countries to follow? Let us know in the comments below.
Exactly. And let's talk about cultural attitudes towards women in Qatar. From the vibrant south to the stunning architecture, Qatar has a rich cultural heritage that values women's contributions.
That's true. Mira, and I've got a funny anecdote to share. When I was visiting Qatar, I saw a group of women playing traditional Arabic music in a cafe. And let me tell you, they were rocking it.
That's amazing. Leo, and it's great to see that Qatar is promoting women's participation in the arts.
Yeah, and it's not just about the arts. Qatar is also making strides in terms of women's education and employment. Did you know that Qatar has a high percentage of women in the workforce?
Wow, that's impressive. Leo, and I've got some info to share too. In Qatar, there are some amazing initiatives that support women's entrepreneurship and innovation. Have you heard about the Qatar Business Incubation Center?
Ah, yes. I've heard great things about that center. They're all about supporting women-led businesses and promoting women's participation in the economy.
Exactly. And let's talk about something positive for a change. In both Malaysia and Qatar, there are amazing women who are making a difference in their communities. From entrepreneurs to activists, women are leading the charge in these countries.
That's true. Mira, and I've got a message for our listeners. If you're a woman traveling to Malaysia or Qatar, remember to be aware of your surroundings and trust your instincts. And if you're a man, remember to respect and support the women in your life.
Thanks, Leo, for that important message. And let's wrap up this topic by saying that while both Malaysia and Qatar have their own set of challenges, they are both making strides in terms of women's safety and comfort. And we're proud to support and promote these efforts.
That's right, Mira. And let's not forget to support the amazing women who are making a difference in these countries. Thanks for joining us on this episode. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more fun and informative content.
To dive into the legal systems of Malaysia and Qatar, I'm curious. Leo, have you had any dealings with the Malaysian legal system?
Actually, I have. Mira, I was involved in a case where I had to navigate the complexities of Malaysian contract law. It was a real challenge, but I managed to come out on top.
Well, that's impressive. I've heard that Malaysia has a relatively robust legal system, but I'm sure it's not without its quirks. What was the most surprising aspect of the case for you?
Well, I think the most surprising thing was the emphasis on Islamic law in certain areas of the Malaysian legal system. It was a bit of a culture shock for me, coming from a secular background.
Ah, yes. Malaysia has a unique blend of Islamic and secular law. It's interesting to see how it plays out in practice. I'm sure our listeners would be fascinated to hear more about it.
Yes, definitely. And speaking of unique legal systems, Qatar has its own set of interesting laws and customs. Have you had any experience with the Qatari legal system? Mira?
Actually, I have. I was working on a project with a Qatari client, and we had to navigate the complexities of Qatari labor law. It was a real challenge, but I managed to learn a lot from the experience.
That's great. I've heard that Qatar has a relatively liberal legal system compared to some other countries in the region. What did you think of the Qatari approach to labor law?
Well, I think it's interesting that Qatar has implemented certain reforms to improve labor rights, but there's still a lot of work to be done. It's a complex issue, and I'm sure our listeners would have a lot to say about it.
Absolutely. And I'm curious. Mira, What do you think are the biggest differences between the Malaysian and Qatari legal systems?
That's a great question. Leo, I think one of the biggest differences is the emphasis on Islamic law in Malaysia. In contrast, Qatar has a more secular approach to law.
That's a great point, Mira. And I think it's also worth noting that Qatar has a more developed system of laws and regulations compared to Malaysia.
Yes, that's true. And I think it's also worth noting made significant progress in recent years in terms of protecting individual rights and freedoms.
Absolutely. And I'm sure our listeners would agree that it's essential for countries to prioritize individual rights and freedoms.
Well, let's take a closer look at some of the specific laws and regulations in both countries. In Malaysia, for example, there are laws that prohibit discrimination against certain groups, such as women and minorities.
That's great to see. Mira. And in Qatar, there are also laws that protect individual rights and freedoms, such as the right to free speech and assembly.
Yes, that's true. And I think it's also worth noting that both countries have made efforts to improve their human rights records in recent years.
Absolutely. And I'm curious, Mira, what do you think are the biggest challenges facing both countries in terms of protecting individual rights and freedoms?
That's a great question. Leo, I think one of the biggest challenges is the balance between individual rights and national security.
Yes. That's a classic dilemma. And I think it's also worth noting that both countries have made efforts to address this issue through legislation and other measures.
Yes, that's true. And I think it's also worth noting that our listeners should be aware of the laws and regulations in both countries, especially if they're planning to visit or live there.
Absolutely. And I'm sure our listeners would appreciate it if we could provide more information on this topic.
Well, let's take a closer look at some of the specific laws and regulations in both countries. If you're interested in learning more, please let us know in the comments below. So, let's talk about Malaysia and Qatar when it comes to spa, healthy living, and relaxation opportunities. I'm sure our listeners living in Malaysia would agree with me that Malaysia has a rich culture of traditional spa treatments like the male massage and the traditional Turkish bath.
Yes. And Qatar has its own unique approach to wellness, with a focus on traditional Arabic massages and herbal remedies. I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about the use of traditional Arabic remedies in Qatar.
Well, I've heard that the traditional Arabic massages in Qatar are quite popular among tourists and locals alike. And have you heard about the wonderful spas in Malaysia that offer holistic wellness treatments like yoga and meditation?
Yes, Malaysia has a great selection of spas that cater to different budgets and preferences. But I think what's interesting is that Qatar is also home to some of the most modern and luxurious spas in the Middle East.
Yes. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the different types of spas in Qatar. For example, what's the difference between a traditional Arabic spa and a modern spa in Qatar?
Well, a traditional Arabic spa in Qatar would typically offer treatments like the Arabic massage, which involves the use of aromatic oils and gentle stretches to relax the muscles. On the other hand, a modern spa in Qatar might offer more Western-style treatments like facials and body wraps.
I see. And what about the cultural attitudes towards health and wellness in Malaysia and Qatar? Do you think there's a difference in how people approach self-care in these two countries?
Yes. I think there is a difference. In Malaysia, there's a strong emphasis on traditional medicine and holistic wellness practices, whereas in Qatar, there's a growing interest in Western-style wellness practices and modern spa treatments.
That's fascinating. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the different types of healthy living options in Malaysia and Qatar. For example, what about the availability of organic food and healthy restaurants in these countries?
Yes. Malaysia has a great selection of healthy restaurants and cafes, especially in the bigger cities like Kuala Lumpur and Penang. And Qatar is also home to some of the best healthy restaurants in the Middle East, with a focus on fresh seafood and organic produce.
That's great to hear. And what about the availability of yoga and fitness studios in Malaysia and Qatar? Do you think there's a difference in the types of studios and classes available in these two countries?
Ah, yes. I think there is a difference. In Malaysia, there's a wide range of yoga and fitness studios, especially in the bigger cities. Whereas in Qatar, there's a growing interest in Western-style fitness studios and gyms.
Ah, I see. And what about the cost of living in Malaysia and Qatar? Do you think there's a difference in the cost of spa treatments and healthy living options in these two countries?
Ah, yes. I think there is a difference. Malaysia is generally a more affordable country compared to Qatar, especially when it comes to spa treatments and healthy living options.
Ah, that's great to know. And finally, what about the tourism industry in Malaysia and Qatar? Do you think there's a difference in how tourists approach spa and wellness tourism in these two countries?
Ah, yes. I think there is a difference. In Malaysia, there's a strong emphasis on cultural tourism and traditional spa treatments, whereas in Qatar, there's a growing interest in modern spa treatments and wellness tourism.
Oh, that's fascinating. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the different types of spa and wellness tourism options in Malaysia and Qatar. Thank you for joining me today, Leo. And I hope our listeners have enjoyed this conversation about spa, healthy living, and relaxation opportunities in Malaysia and Qatar.
Ah, thank you. Mira, it's been a pleasure discussing these topics with you, and I hope our listeners have learned something new and interesting about Malaysia and Qatar.
I'm of Malaysia, where the phrase harmony is taken quite literally. They have a rich tapestry of cultures, with different faiths living together in relative peace. It's amazing to see how they manage to balance their diverse heritage with their vibrant modern life.
That's fascinating. I've heard that Malaysia has a strong tradition of interfaith dialogue. In fact, they have a special department called the National Unity and Integration Department, which focuses on promoting unity and understanding among different faiths. I'm curious, Mira, have you ever attended any of their interfaith events?
Actually, I have. I was at a conference in Kuala Lumpur, and it was incredible to see people from different faiths coming together to discuss their perspectives and share their experiences. It was a truly enlightening experience, and I was struck by the level of respect and empathy that everyone showed towards each other.
Wow, that sounds amazing. I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about it. Mira, can you tell us more about the different faiths that you encountered during your visit to Malaysia?
Of course. Malaysia is home to a diverse range of faiths, including Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, Christianity, and Sikhs. Each faith has its own unique traditions and customs, but they all coexist peacefully in Malaysia. In fact, the country's motto is unity and diversity, which really reflects the spirit of the people.
That's incredible. I've heard that Malaysia is also home to some incredible architectural landmarks, such as the Batu Caves and the Sultan Abdul Samad Building. Have you had a chance to visit any of these sites? Mira?
Oh, yes. I visited the Batu Caves during my trip, and it was breathtaking. The sheer scale and grandeur of the caves were inspiring, and I was struck by the intricate carvings and sculptures that adorn the walls. It's a truly sacred place, and I felt a deep sense of peace and tranquility as I walked through the caves.
I'm sure our listeners would love to see some photos of the Batu Caves. Mira, can you tell us more about the significance of the caves in Malaysian culture?
Of course. The Batu Caves are considered one of the most sacred sites in Hinduism, and they're home to the famous 40-meter tall statue of Lord Murugan. The caves are also an important pilgrimage site for Hindus from all over the world. It's fascinating to see how the caves have been preserved and maintained over the centuries, and I was struck by the level of respect and care that the Malaysian authorities show towards this sacred site.
That's amazing. I'm sure our listeners are now curious about Qatar, the second country we're comparing today. Mira, can you tell us more about the opportunities for spiritual growth in Qatar?
Actually, Qatar has a rich spiritual heritage, with a strong emphasis on Islamic traditions and practices. The country is home to many beautiful mosques, including the stunning Sheikh Faisal bin Qasim Al Thani Museum. I was struck by the beauty and simplicity of the mosque's design, and I was impressed by the level of respect and reverence that the Qataris show towards their faith.
Wow, that sounds incredible. I've heard that Qatar also has a strong tradition of interfaith dialogue, similar to Malaysia. Mira, can you tell us more about the initiatives that Qatar has taken to promote interfaith understanding?
Yes, Qatar has a number of initiatives that promote interfaith dialogue and understanding. For example, the Accommodation has a program that brings together people from different faiths to discuss their perspectives and share their experiences. It's a truly inspiring initiative, and I was struck by the level of commitment and dedication that the Qataris show towards promoting interfaith understanding.
That's amazing. I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about the different faiths that you encountered during your visit to Qatar. Mira, can you tell us more about the different faiths that you encountered during your visit?
Of course, Qatar is home to a diverse range of faiths, including Islam, Christianity, Hinduism, and Sikhism. Each faith has its own unique traditions and customs, but they all coexist peacefully in Qatar. In fact, the country's motto is unity and progress, which really reflects the spirit of the people.
That's incredible. I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about the different architectural landmarks in Qatar. Mira, can you tell us more about the significance of the Sheikh Faisal bin Qasim Al Thani Museum?
Of course, the Sheikh Faisal bin Qasim Al Thani Museum is a stunning example of Islamic architecture, and it's home to a vast collection of artifacts and exhibits that showcase the history and culture of Qatar. The museum is a truly sacred site, and I was struck by the level of respect and reverence that the Qataris show towards their faith.
That's amazing. I'm sure our listeners would love to see some photos of the museum. Mira, can you tell us more about the initiatives that Qatar has taken to promote interfaith understanding?
Yes, Qatar has a number of initiatives that promote interfaith dialogue and understanding. For example, the Qatar Foundation has a program that brings together people from different faiths to discuss their perspectives and share their experiences. It's a truly inspiring initiative, and I was struck by the level of commitment and dedication that the Qataris show towards promoting interfaith understanding.
That's incredible. I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about the different faiths that you encountered during your visit to Qatar. Mira, can you tell us more about the different faiths that you encountered during your visit?
Of course, Qatar is home to a diverse range of faiths, including Islam, Christianity, Hinduism, and Sikhism. Each faith has its own unique traditions and customs, but they all coexist peacefully in Qatar. In fact, the country's motto is unity and progress, which really reflects the spirit of the people.
That's amazing. I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about the different architectural landmarks in Qatar. Mira, can you tell us more about the significance of the Sheikh Faisal bin Qasim Al Thani Museum?
Of course. The Sheikh Faisal bin Qasim Al Thani Museum is a stunning example of Islamic architecture, and it's home to a vast collection of artifacts and exhibits that showcase the history and culture of Qatar. The museum is a truly sacred site, and I was struck by the level of respect and reverence that the Qataris show towards their faith.
That's amazing. I'm sure our listeners would love to see some photos of the museum. Mira, can you tell us more about the initiatives that Qatar has taken to promote interfaith understanding?
Yes, Qatar has a number of initiatives that promote interfaith dialogue and understanding. For example, the Qatar Foundation has a program that brings together people from different faiths to discuss their perspectives and share. Malaysia and Qatar are both known for their rich cultural diversity, but what sets them apart in terms of social equality, respect for minorities, and diversity? Let's dive in and explore the unique aspects of each country.
I think Malaysia's diversity is quite fascinating, with its mix of Malay, Chinese, Indian, and indigenous communities. But what really caught my attention is the country's efforts to promote unity and social cohesion.
Yes. Malaysia's concept of One Malaysia is a great example of this. It's a government initiative that aims to promote unity and equality among all citizens, regardless of their background.
And I've heard that Malaysia has a vibrant cultural scene, with many festivals and celebrations throughout the year. But How does the country balance its Muslim majority with the needs and rights of its minority communities?
Well, Leo, I think Malaysia has made significant strides in promoting social equality and respect for minorities. The country has a strong tradition of tolerance and inclusivity, and it's not uncommon to see people from different faiths and backgrounds interacting and celebrating together.
That's great to hear. Mira, but what about Qatar? I've heard that the country has a more conservative approach to social issues.
Ah, yes. Qatar is a bit more conservative, but that doesn't mean it's not working to promote social equality and respect for minorities. In fact, Qatar has made significant efforts to promote the rights of women and migrant workers.
I'm impressed. Mira, but I've also heard that Qatar has a reputation for being quite strict when it comes to social issues. How does the country balance its conservative values with the need for social equality and respect for minorities?
Well, Leo, I think Qatar is working to modernize its social policies while still respecting its cultural heritage. The country has implemented many reforms aimed at promoting social equality and protecting the rights of marginalized communities.
I'm curious. Mira, how do you think Malaysia and Qatar compare in terms of social equality and respect for minorities? Do you think one country is doing a better job than the other?
Oh, that's a tough question. Leo, I think both countries have their strengths and weaknesses, but if I had to say, I think Malaysia is doing a better job of promoting social equality and respect for minorities.
Really? I'm not so sure. I think Qatar has made significant strides in promoting social equality and protecting the rights of marginalized communities. Maybe it's just a matter of perspective.
I think you're right. Leo, it's all about perspective. But what do you think our listeners think about this? Do they think Malaysia or Qatar is doing a better job of promoting social equality and respect for minorities?
Ah, that's a great question. Mira, I think it's time we opened up the conversation to our listeners. What do you think? Folks, do you think Malaysia or Qatar is doing a better job of promoting social equality and respect for minorities?
I love how we're involving our listeners in the conversation. Leo! But let's get back to the topic at hand. What about grassroots efforts to promote social equality and respect for minorities in Malaysia and Qatar?
Ah, great point. Mira, grassroots efforts are so important in promoting social change. In Malaysia, I've heard that there are many community-led initiatives aimed at promoting social equality and respect for minorities.
That's wonderful. Leo! And in Qatar, I think there are also many grassroots efforts underway to promote social equality and respect for minorities. But what do you think is the key to making these efforts successful?
Ah, that's a great question. Mira, I think the key is to involve the community and make sure that everyone has a voice in the decision-making process.
I completely agree. Leo, community engagement is crucial in promoting social change. And I think that's one area where Malaysia and Qatar could learn from each other.
Ah, I see what you mean. Mira, maybe we can have a follow-up conversation on this topic soon.
I'd love that. Leo! And in the meantime, let's keep the conversation going with our listeners. What do you think? Folks, do you have any suggestions for how Malaysia and Qatar can promote social equality and respect for minorities?
Great point. Mira, let's keep the conversation going.
I'm sure our listeners in Malaysia would agree that taxes can be a bit of a mystery, especially for expats. So, let's dive into the world of taxation in Malaysia.
Yes. The land of delicious nasi lemak and complex tax laws. Malaysia has a progressive tax system, with a range of tax rates depending on income level. But, Mira, I'm curious. Have you ever tried to navigate the Malaysian tax system? It's like trying to find your way out of a labyrinth.
Well, I had my fair share of tax-related headaches, but I've learned to appreciate the complexity. For example, Malaysia has a unique concept of tax residency that can affect expats. If you're considered a tax resident, you'll need to pay taxes on your worldwide income. But if you're not, you can claim a tax exemption on foreign source income.
That's right. Mira. And it's not just about the tax rates. It's also about the tax exemptions and reliefs available. For instance, Malaysia offers a tax relief for medical expenses, which can be a lifesaver for expats who have to deal with medical bills.
Exactly. And it's not just about individual taxes. Leo, Malaysia also has a range of taxes on businesses, including corporate tax and sales tax. But I'm curious, have you ever had to deal with the Malaysian bureaucracy? I've heard it can be a challenge.
Ah, yes. The Malaysian bureaucracy is legendary. But, Mira, I've found that a little bit of humor and a lot of patience can go a long way. For example, I once had to deal with a tax issue, and the officer was being quite stubborn. I just smiled and said, "Sorry, officer, but I think you're trying to tax my soul." He laughed, and we resolved the issue on the spot.
That's amazing. Leo, I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about your tax adventures. But let's move on to the topic of retirement and social rights for long-term immigrants in Malaysia.
Yes. The golden years. In Malaysia, expats can retire and enjoy a relatively comfortable life, thanks to the country's pension and social security systems. But, Mia, I'm curious. Have you ever thought about retiring in Malaysia? I've heard the cost of living is relatively low.
Actually, Leo, I have thought about it, and I think it's a great option for expats who want to retire in a warm and welcoming country. Malaysia has a range of pension and social security schemes available, including the Malaysian Social Security Organization and the Employees Provident Fund.
That's right, Mia. And it's not just about the pension schemes. It's also about the social safety net provided by the Malaysian government. For instance, Malaysia has a range of programs to support low-income families and individuals, including the Bantuan Era Hidup program.
Exactly. And it's not just about individual support. Leo, Malaysia also has a range of social programs to support the community as a whole, including programs to promote education and healthcare.
Ah, yes. The Malaysian government is committed to providing a high quality of life for its citizens and expats alike. And, Mira, I'm curious, have you ever thought about the cultural differences between Malaysia and Qatar? Our next topic?
Actually, Leo, I've been about it, and I think it's fascinating how different cultures can shape our experiences as expats. For example, in Qatar, expats can enjoy a range of cultural events and festivals, including the Qatar International Food Festival.
Ah, yes. The Qatar International Food Festival is legendary. But, Mira, I'm curious. Have you ever tried Qatari cuisine? I have heard it's delicious, but also a bit of an acquired taste.
Well, Leo, I've tried it, and I think it's definitely an acquired taste. But I'm curious, have you ever thought about the tax implications of living in Qatar? I've heard the tax system is quite different from Malaysia.
Ah, yes. The tax system in Qatar is indeed different. Mira, Qatar has a relatively low tax regime, with a range of tax-free loans and exemptions available. But, Mira, I'm curious. Have you ever thought about the social rights and benefits available to expats in Qatar?
Actually, Leo, I have thought about it, and I think Qatar has a range of social programs to support expats, including programs to promote education and healthcare. But I'm curious, have you ever thought about the cultural differences between Qatar and Malaysia?
Ah, yes. The cultural differences between Qatar and Malaysia are indeed fascinating. Mira, for instance, in Qatar, expats can enjoy a range of cultural events and festivals, including the Qatar International Food Festival.
Exactly. And it's not just about individual events. Leo, Qatar also has a range of cultural programs to support the community as a whole, including programs to promote education and healthcare.
Ah, yes. The Qatari government is committed to providing a high quality of life for its citizens and expats alike. And, Mira, I'm curious. Have you ever thought about the tax implications of living in Qatar?
Actually, Leo, I've been about it, and I think it's fascinating how different tax regimes can affect our experiences as expats. For example, in Qatar, expats can enjoy a range of tax-free zones and exemptions.
Yes. The tax-free zones and exemptions in Qatar are indeed a blessing for expats. But, Mira, I'm curious. Have you ever thought about the social rights and benefits available to expats in Qatar?
Actually, Leo, I have thought about it. And I think Qatar has a range of social programs to support expats, including programs to promote education and healthcare. But I'm curious, have you ever thought about the cultural differences between Qatar and Malaysia?
Yes. The cultural differences between Qatar and Malaysia are indeed fascinating. Mira, for instance, in Qatar, expats can enjoy a range of cultural events and festivals, including the Qatar International Food Festival.
Exactly. And it's not just about individual events. Leo, Qatar also has a range of cultural programs to support the community as a whole, including programs to promote education and healthcare.
Yes. The Qatari government is committed to providing a high quality of life for its citizens and expats alike. And, Mira, I'm curious. Have you ever thought about the tax implications of living in Qatar?
Actually, Leo, I've been about it. And I think it's fascinating how different tax regimes can affect our experiences as expats. For example, in Qatar, expats can enjoy a range of tax-free zones and exemptions. So, our current topic is all about the rate of meeting specific interests into countries, and we're comparing Malaysia and Qatar. I want to share with you the unique offerings for enthusiasts in both countries. Let's dive right in.
That's right. Mira, both countries have a rich array of activities and events that cater to various interests. In Malaysia, for instance, you'll find a plethora of hobby clubs and associations that bring people together. From gardening to photography, there's something for everyone.
I'm certain that our listeners living in Malaysia would agree with me that the country has a thriving expat community. This community often organizes events and activities that are open to the public, making it easy for newcomers to meet like-minded people.
Yes. And in Qatar, you'll find a similar sense of community, particularly among the expat population. The Qatar Foundation, for example, hosts various events and conferences that attract people from all over the world.
That's fascinating. Leo, I've heard that Qatar has a vibrant arts and culture scene, with numerous galleries and museums showcasing local and international art. I'm curious, have you had a chance to explore any of these museums?
Actually, yes. I visited the Museum of Islamic Art in Doha, and it was an incredible experience. The museum features an impressive collection of Islamic art and artifacts from around the world.
Wow, that sounds amazing. I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about it. Perhaps we can do a follow-up episode on the cultural attractions in Qatar.
I'm game if you are. Mira, but back to Malaysia. I've heard that the country has a thriving food scene, with a wide variety of street food and night markets. Have you tried any of the local cuisine?
Oh, you bet I have. In fact, I'm a huge fan of Malaysian food. The flavors and aromas are simply incredible. And I'm not alone, judging by the crowds that flock to the night markets.
I can imagine. I've had my fair share of Malaysian food, and I must say, it's some of the best I've ever had. But I'm curious, Mira, what do you think sets Malaysia apart from other countries in terms of meeting specific interests?
Well, I think it's the country's unique blend of cultures and traditions. Malaysia is a multicultural society, with a mix of Malay, Chinese, and Indian influences. This diversity creates a rich tapestry of interests and hobbies that are worth exploring.
That's a great point. Mira, and in Qatar, I think it's the country's focus on innovation and technology that sets it apart. The Qatar Foundation, for example, has a strong focus on STEM education and research.
Yes. I've heard that Qatar has made significant investments in education and research, particularly in the fields of science and technology. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about these initiatives.
Absolutely. And speaking of innovation, I've heard that Malaysia has a thriving startup scene, with numerous incubators and accelerators that support entrepreneurs and startups.
That's right. Leo, Malaysia has a growing startup ecosystem, with many innovative companies and entrepreneurs making waves in the industry. And I'm sure our listeners would love to learn more about these startups and their success stories. As we wrap up our discussion on meeting specific interests in Malaysia and Qatar, I want to ask our listeners what are some of your favorite hobbies or interests that you've discovered in these countries.
Well, I think we've only scratched the surface of the many amazing activities and events that these countries have to offer. But I'm sure our listeners will continue to explore and discover new interests and hobbies.
And don't forget to share your thoughts and comments below. We'd love to hear from you and respond to your feedback.
That's all for now. Folks, thanks for joining us on this episode of our comparison podcast. We'll be back soon with more. So until then, take care and see you in the next one.
Warmest wishes from us.
And don't forget to follow the Jet Off AI YouTube channel for more episodes like this. Hit that bell icon to catch our videos the moment they drop and be among the first to listen.
Thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you in the next one.
Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring.